The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested.
I left my Buick in the parking lot Spectra had given me directions to, hoping the old girl would be safe on this desolate piece of asphalt 20 miles outside of Tampa. The nearest island of civilization was a corporate retreat offering cocktails for the craven and boat tours for the more adventurous of executives. The roads were in such disrepair that there weren't even any go gangs haunting them. I checked the magical wards carved into the already badly chipped paint job of my car again, before turning my torch to the swamp and the path I was promised through it. Because I tend to look at the positive things in life, I was glad that I had been sent into the Everglades in early June, instead of at a later point in summer, and also that my leather coat, wide-brimmed hat, and cargo pants protected me from a quarter of the mosquito bites that would have otherwise pierced my skin. Yes, I'm that guy. I have the long hair and pallid complexion to match. And of course I am also tall, gangly some would say, and my blue eyes have that supernatural glow to them when you look in the right light. I don't dress like this for show, I just find it comfortable. Besides, I need a lot of pockets for charms, fetishes, notebooks, and basic survival tools like scissors, tape, and the hunting knife I was sure would come in handy on this late-night nature walk. Not to mention my mouth spray and the Colt Manhunter I barely ever use. So I get bad breath sometimes. Sue me. At least I do something about it. After having passed over it several times with the light cone of my torch, I finally noticed the rickety wooden walkway leading off the parking lot and into the trees. Frogs croaked and rivulets of water burbled. The air was hot and heavy with humidity, but it was a little fresher than it had been during the day when I was driving. I don't have AC. It's not that I don't believe in it, but I do rarely make it this far south. On the Astral, the swamp was brimming with activity. I could feel the flow of mana through the land, wild streams curbing around stale ponds. Minor ley lines shifted around faster than I had ever seen, tentacles beckoning me to ever greater flows of power. It was difficult to filter through the pulsating of magic, but I was very good at filtering. Even the walkway, protesting my weight with a cacophony of creaks, seemed alive with moss, fungi, and faded memories. I could have almost turned off the flashlight, but then the Astral is no replacement for eyesight, especially considering that the walkway was intact in some astral places where it was not in the real. The only reason I was perceiving astrally in the first place was because I had no intention of being surprised by some awakened alligator. Spectra had assured me that these parts of the Everglades were really quite safe, and also that they weren't parts of the Everglades at all, though started further south. Why would I call them the Everglades? But then I'm not American, so I feel entitled to not knowing details like that.
"Don't worry, I'll protect you," a
cartoonish voice informed me. It had taken me years to get used to hearing my mentor spirit's voice in my head with such clarity, and I still wasn't completely happy with his intrusions. His name is Selman, and my relationship to him is unusual on account of me being the only shaman under his wing. There are good reasons for why this seemed like a good idea at the time, and some would say that I had no choice but to accept him, but I won't get into that now. Don't pretend like you wouldn't be the first to run if some water bear behemoth popped out of the water right now, I responded, vocalizing the words in my mind. Just as I wanted to push away a low-hanging branch with my hunting knife, I lost all feeling in my hand. With a dull thump, the blade bored itself into an unusually thick plank below. A palm's breadth to the right, and it would have fallen into the water.
"Never forget who gives you the tools to protect yourself, Callum Grimshaw,"
said Selman, the threat in his voice a little too serious for my comfort. Feeling returned to my hand, and I flexed it to test my motor functions. Episodes like these had become all too common in the last few months. "A little irritable today, are we?" I asked as I picked up the knife and continued walking.
"One does not always get what one wants. That's what my godmother always used to say."
I could almost see Selman pouting like a child.
It is just unfair sometimes. I shall leave now, I have court duties to attend to.
Salmon was always like this. He had aspirations of power and delusions of grandeur. For a spirit, he was very human. On one hand, he wanted me as a friend he could tell his troubles to, but on the other, he wanted me as a devoted acolyte. I considered myself neither. The foliage cleared up, and I was suddenly standing on a long, thin island separating the swamp from a small lagoon. What little remained of the waning moon was reflected on the gently rippling water, assisted in its efforts of illumination by swarms of ghostly fireflies that were almost blinding in the Astral. There was an impressive amount of stars in the sky, at least compared to my usual Boston stomping grounds. About 100 meters down the shore, I spotted a familiar aura. It was a paradox of chrome dullness and burning passion, fascinating and distinctive. Palmiro Matzo V, a pig-skinned orc with more augments than natural tissue, was waving his rifle around, presumably hitting virtual targets only he could see floating over the lake. Even this far from civilization, he took OPSEC so seriously that he wouldn't actually shoot to avoid detection. He turned around by 180 degrees, his rifle aimed at me. It took him a moment to recognize who I was. Looking up, I could make out one of his tiny surveillance drones by the little dots of void they created in the Astral. "You can't just sneak up on me like this, Grimcal!" the orc shouted, sounding a little relieved. "I wasn't sneaking," I responded as I made my way over to him. Despite having inherited the name Palmiro from his great-great-grandfather, who, as he was fond of telling everyone, had come to New Jersey from Naples well over 100 years ago, he called himself not Palmiro V, but Matzo V. "How's the head?" I asked. I hadn't seen Matzo in over 2 months. "It's better. Recovered, you might say. Got a new cranial plate installed." He knocked on his skull, making a dull, metallic sound. "And my whole jaw's now mechanical. I owe you for that Ithaca thing, chummer. I really do." I shrugged. "Don't mention it, mate. You saved my life as much as I saved yours." "Don't fucking insult my honor, Grimcal. I mean it," Matzo snapped. "You fucking saved me, not the other way around. I owe you and you don't owe me nothing." The orc's torso swiveled around to face the lake and shot 3 targets in quick succession. His pitch-black cyber arms moved with superhuman speed and precision, controlled by military-grade sensors, gyros, and wired reflexes. Apparently Selmin wasn't the only one who was a little touchy today. "All right, Matzo, I respect your honor and I owe you nothing, while you do owe me for Ithaca," I said in an attempt to soothe his temper. I'd worked with him long enough to know that things could get out of hand when he got angry, though he had improved over the years. "You all right?" "It's nothing," he said, shooting down almost a dozen invisible targets in a perfect arc. "My fucking guma. I had to end it with her. You know how attached they get." He turned around and placed the rifle in his shoulder holster. "Sometimes I think this pneumatic system is more of a curse than a blessing." "Well, you have to admit it is a little vain," I noted. "So? We can all be like you, can we?" Matzo was joking, which was a good sign that he had calmed down. "After this job, you and I are gonna go buy you some new wheels. I got a cousin in Trenton who can set you up real nice. Lots of things he can do to a car. After this job, you sure are gonna be able to afford it." "I hear you got us this one, as opposed to Spectra, but I still have no idea what we're actually supposed to do," I said. Usually the 3 of us all had our areas of expertise, and I felt a little left out of the loop on this run. Matzo, Spectra, and I mostly worked in our own little bubbles, coming together a few times a year for high-profile jobs in different areas of the East Coast. "This is family business, very important, but they wanted it handled externally. That's why you're involved. This isn't even my own family, this is the Cornettis over in New York," Matzo explained. "The capo, Don Trevor, likes his artwork. You know, artifacts and all that. He had this thing, the Gilded Moon, a medallion or some shit. I don't know nothing about art. Apparently it's supposed to be South American, cost him half a fortune. But it was stolen from him, by a made guy if you'll believe it. To be honest, I understand very little of Mazzo's mafia politics, and the fact that he would meticulously explain every single aspect of it to me if I asked is exactly the reason why I don't ask. That sounds like a major betrayal, I said. Fucking A. Mazzo nodded. This guy, Vincenzo Calabarsee, he was apparently a poor earner, but he'd been eyeing a captain position for years and he never got it. He was too fucking focused on his magic. He's one of them kick punch guys. Mazzo clicked his fingers to indicate that the words were sitting on the tip of his tongue. Physical adept, I helpfully said. Psychic adept, exactly. He's one of thems, I think. Good at cracking skulls, but too distracted to give his all to the family. So because he's a fucking turncoat, he fucking took the fucking thing and fucking fucked off with it! Mazzo went from explaining to seething over the course of a single sentence. His rifle was back in his hands in a split second, and he fired at least 24 virtual targets in such quick succession that his arms became a blur of metal. Sounds like a real asshole, I said. But why are we in Florida? Mazzo took a deep breath before he continued his explanation. Calabarsee took off to the Caribbean League. Tried to sell the thing with the help of this Drek-for-Brains fence Slingshot. Right here is where Spectre says our ride's gonna pick us up, so we can run the border without anyone getting suspicious. Sounds like less of a man on the run than a man who needs to be caught by surprise, I noted. Mazzo nodded. He's well connected, especially down there. Always big into smuggling. He's even got a condo in Miami, but the Brugade's got eyes on there. So what's the plan then? I asked. We go in, whack 'em, smash 'em, splash 'em, whatever. We get the Gilded Moon thing, bring it back to New York, get paid. The way Mazzo said it, it sounded easy. Sure, but we don't know where he is, right? It was becoming increasingly obvious that the planning phase of this run could have used a little touch of my magic. As I said, this guy Slingshot. Spectre knows more about that than I do. The orc looked at his antiquated but decidedly stylish Rolex wristwatch. What the fuck is she anyway? As if on cue, an elf emerged from the tree line. You fucking late again, Mazzo complained. Did your mother not teach you discipline? I checked the time myself. It was indeed 1 minute after our arranged meeting time. Mazzo took punctuality as seriously as he took OPSEC. I was having a very intellectually stimulating conversation about beetle addiction with a sapient alligator, said Spectra, her voice perfectly amplified and targeted so that Mazzo and I could hear it as though she was standing right next to us. Spectra was an unusual elf. She was certainly tall and graceful, but her face was closer to round and cute than aristocratic and beautiful. She was the maximum amount of voluptuous and hourglass shape that elven women got to be, maybe even a little more so, and her dark amber eyes could shoot looks that promised things undreamt of. I knew that as a self-described biohacker, she had only marginally less cyberware than Mazzo, though hers was the type of Delta-grade product that took great care to be invisible. She could change most aspects of her appearance to a degree that even her close friends would have trouble recognizing her. A state-of-the-art pheromone suite usually sealed the deal in seducing any man or woman she might want anything at all from, and the cyber deck she had installed in her body allowed her to delve deep into the matrix, even as she was smooth-talking. Spectra pressed a locus on her wrist as she approached us. I just sent out the ping. Acuario should be here in a few minutes. Who is the bloke anyway? I asked. Spectra's many friends had often come in useful, but she usually reserved them for special situations, to keep our splits as large as possible. Imagine the Gulf of Astral and the Caribbean Sea, right? The totality of both, okay? I appreciated the fact that she did not sound flirtatious when talking to me or Mazzo. We were her friends and professional colleagues, not some target she was trying to manipulate. Any 2 points in that geographical region, Acuario can get you from one to the other, and none will be the wiser. We met back when I was running in New Orleans. Still seems a bit overkill for a man who is on the run. We'll be making us known to him eventually, I said. Like I said, he's a made guy and a smuggler with a lot of contacts down there. Matzo raised his hand. Might be a bit much, but also might turn out to be a smart decision. Before I could respond, a monster emerged from the waters behind me. It was a cold, lifeless entity, a wedge of void in the life song of the swamp, and the size of 2 buses. I could hear the low hum of its engines. I was only able to hear them in the soundscape of the swamp if I actively listened to them. After a few moments, an opening appeared in the side of the submersible. Illuminated by the dim light of the interior cabin, a lanky figure stepped outside. Acuario was a middle-aged mestizo man, more on the indigenous than the Caucasian side, with a bald head and an affable face. Both were covered in cyberware, the subdermal wires of which reached across his neck and down past the collar of his neoprene shirt. His legs were as thin as my arms, and his arms were even thinner. Still, there seemed to be a wiry strength to them, and he had the confident gait of someone with little to fear from the world. "What a tall trio we have here, eh?" he said, his voice drenched in a thick Spanish accent. "Spectra, mi chica, you're looking guapissima as ever." Laughing, he gave Spectra a kiss on both cheeks. "And you must be the one-man army I was told about. Remind me not to joderte. I wouldn't want to have you on my bad side." Acuario shook Matzo's hand, then turned to me. "I like your style, man. Very detectivo noir, but with the magia, it's very cool." "Well, I did used to be a detective, but that was in another life," I said, as I shook his hand. The fact that, despite having only just met this man, I was talking about a topic adjacent to the incident that made the Met discard me like an empty clip did not escape me. I sensed him, but could not find anything magical in his turbulent aura. I was never an expert in identifying specific cyberware from the gaps it can leave on the Astral, but I was fairly certain that this man was not pheromoned up. He was just charming. "It's been too long, Acuario. You haven't aged much," Spectra complimented. "Ah, it's just the light, trust me. I am viejo now." Acuario gently caressed Spectra's shoulder. I wondered if the two had been involved at some point, or if this was just what charismatic people did when they talked to each other. "You were always an old man," Spectra joked, "but a very handsome one." Acuario laughed. "This woman, she will robarte el corazón, even if it is made out of stone," he said, looking at Matzo and me. "Come on, let us go aboard my darling Carolina. Podemos comer algo, or we can just leave and have a bite on the open ocean. It is very nice having dinner in the moonlight." "Give me a moment, will you? I gotta pack it in first," Matzo demanded. He raised his shoulders and straightened his arms. About a dozen tennis ball-sized drones descended from the sky and entered 2 small hatches where his armpits should have been. He then walked a few meters away from the shore and lifted a polychromatic blanket concealing 4 large plastic suitcases, presumably full of weapons. Each of them must have been so heavy that I would have needed both hands to lift it, but Matzo simply squatted, manipulated his mechanical fingers into a contraption that could grab the handles of 2 boxes in each hand, and walked them aboard Acuario's ship like they were filled with styrofoam packing peanuts. It was hot and moist inside Carolina. The air, I mean. It was also uncomfortable. Despite the seats being almost acceleration couches, the grey-black plastic and rubber paneling was lit by LEDs, and there wasn't a speck of colour inside the boat. I had expected a little more Latin flair from Acuario, seeing as he had come off as quite the romantic, but this place was strictly business. The man himself was locked inside the cockpit, isolated from the rest of us, where he'd plugged himself into the controls. The engine was loud, as though it was right next to my head wherever I sat, and Spectra had explained that it was actually very silent, and redirected most of its clamour to the inside in order to be more difficult to detect. I said that complimentary earplugs would be a nice touch. She asked me what I had just said. I told her to forget about it. She laughed. I was sure Matzo, with his mil-spec chrome, was able to pick out that conversation perfectly, but the humor of it would have been lost on him. I sat in a padded chair trying to read the latest issue of the Cambridge Hermetical Review. Maybe it was the clangor of machinery, or the sudden violent swaying that happened more often than was comfortable, but the reclining by the fireplace type atmosphere just wouldn't set in. It was at an article about the effects of soapstone deposits on the flow of ley lines that I realized I had just read a relatively simple paragraph 7 times, and still had no idea what it meant. I was tired, and the environment I was in wasn't exactly aiding my concentration. It was time for some sleep, or at least time to try for some sleep. I closed my eyes and reclined into the chair, focusing on the thrumming of the engines and the rushing of the water outside the hull. Without making a conscious effort, I transformed the soundscape into a calming lull, a type of brown noise that would allow me to detach inward. I felt the strings of my own consciousness drop from my body, and with them the alien power that was animating it. At this point, I should mention that I do not sleep like others do. I haven't since my extended stay at the hospital and my acquaintance with Selman. As my soul drifted from my body, my mind was calmed. It was as though I was seeing everything through a haze, feeling lightheaded, incorporeal, drugged. My sense of time abandoned me as I stepped out of the tunnel and into the soft grass of a misty glade. Light shattered on the trees, winding its way through the forest. I was me, but not myself, a spectator in my own mind, but unaware of my own existence. Selman was standing by a path, his steel-skinned face deformed by warts and pockmarks. He was wearing a tall conical hat and a heavy ultramarine robe. I don't know how long he led me down the path, but we eventually arrived at a feast by the side of a pond. Dozens of humanoids sat at 4 long tables, their faces perfectly symmetrical examples of pure beauty, like elves but with golden eyes that had no pupils. The men were dressed in flamboyant tunics and surcoats, while the women were wearing scarcely anything at all. They indulged in fragrant salads, impossible fruits and colourful meats, drinking starlight and tears out of blossom-shaped cups. None paid me any mind as they exchanged hushed gossip and tasteful jokes. Servants who looked and dressed just like Selman refilled their glasses and platters. Sitting on a throne of thorns, holding a wooden scepter in one hand and a golden chalice in the other, was the king. His bare chest boasted inhuman musculature, and his long white hair flowed into pearlescent tattoos moving across his skin. His face was an illusion, like those paintings that always appear as though they are looking you straight in the eyes. It's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, but the king does not actually have a face. Selman pushed me onto the pond, and I walked upon its silver surface. There were human souls dancing on it, naked like I was. Their bodies moved to a melody created by the frogs and birds singing for their liege. It was easy to move with them. I didn't even have to think about it. Everything that constituted me, my memories, my personalities, my moods, my knowledge, it all dissipated into this small crowd of dancers being moved by the music. I was not even aware that my presence served to entertain the king and his guests. I was just there, melting with the other souls, separating from them and falling together again. There was nothing but the dance, nothing but the single-minded focus on being carried by the music. The water gave way underneath my feet, and I was swallowed by it. My sight went black. I was back in my body, but my eyes were still closed. Matzo's cold mechanical hand was touching my shoulder, trying to rouse me, but I could not react. A tingling sensation spread through my body from my neck. Selman was taking charge again, linking my body to my mind. I opened my eyes. "What are you, the Sleeping Beauty?" Matzo asked. "I think I have too much chest hair for that," I responded, grabbing my mouth spray. Matzo grinned. We're fucking here. Key West. Time to go to work. How late is it? Matzo raised an eyebrow. 7:30 in the morning. Perfect time to do some recon. Instead of some secret cove or mangrove-sheltered inlet, Acuario had moored Carolina at an isolated pier on the southern side of the island. Azure water lapped against the boat's hull, and the white sand of the beach was practically aglow with the light of the rising sun. Palm trees swayed gently in the warm wind, and a flock of seagulls rose majestically into the sky. For a moment, I thought I had arrived in some kind of pre-awakening paradise. The illusion was shattered as soon as it manifested itself. The rickety pier was in a worrying state of disrepair, and scarlet flounders that practically radiated death and fear on the Astral hovered through the water around it. A pack of wild dogs was going through a trash heap on the beach. The line of palm trees was interrupted frequently by hurricane-ruined houses, and the seagulls gave off unnatural screams and probably had teeth. "You sure this is a great place to hang about?" I asked Acuario, who was sitting at the end of the pier, a fishing rod in the sea. Spectre was reclining next to him. "The pier belongs to a friend of mine. She is not here for most of the year, but she lives in the Casa Grande over there." He pointed at the only beachfront property in what was, relatively speaking, pristine condition. "You have to go through the bad part of town to get anywhere, but usually this is not a problem." "It's where Slingshot has his office as well, so it's extra convenient," Spectre added. "Island's not that big, let's be honest," I said. "Everything's in walking distance. What's the plan anyway?" "Well, I'll be plugging myself into the local matrix, see what I can find that'll get us an advantage. You two go over the area, scout Slingshot's office, have boots on the ground. Then tonight we go in there for a meeting with a stacked deck," Spectre explained. "You make that sound awfully easy," I noted. "Come on, how many prime runners do you think this shithole sees a year?" she asked. "More than I would care to underestimate," I responded. "While you're at it, could you look into the magical politics of the Caribbean League right now?" "Why?" "Come on, you read the news. The fight for the head Hungan. It's been going on since 57 now, and there's a year's worth of dragon toenail clippings at stake." I pointed at the island behind me. "All I want to know is what kind of caliber voodoo I'll be running into before it's close enough for me to see it on the Astral." "That sounds like something you should know about. Magic is your job in this team." I didn't appreciate Spectre's tone. Well, I was hardly involved in the planning process, was I? I was a little angry. He just called me up one morning and told me to drive down to Tampa. Spectre shot a glance at Matzo, who was standing next to me. The orc shrugged. "Okay, I'll look into it. You're right, I didn't involve you like I should have." "Thank you," I said, maybe a little too forcefully. "Chip truth, I told Spectre not to involve you in the planning process," Matzo admitted as we were walking through the streets of Key West. "Don Trevor don't trust magic users no more." "Why am I even on the job then?" I asked. Matzo shrugged. "We always work together. We need a wizard for a job like this, and you're the only wizard I trust myself." "You know, a lot of shamans would take offense to you calling them wizards," I noted. "That's a term usually reserved for hermetics." "Not you, though. Besides, you used to be one of thems. I know, you told me." I was surprised Matzo remembered this. Despite there being a few people up and about at this hour, no one bothered us. There were gazers from the boarded-up windows of once white American dream homes, early risers looking down from squat apartment buildings, mugs of soycaf in hand, and inhabitants of ramshackle huts keeping a suspicious eye on us. But if any of them had ill intentions, the heavily chromed orc and the orally impressive shaman did not seem like they were worth the trouble. Devastation marked Key West's astral plane. Something had come through here, and recently. "Spectre, when was Key West last hit by a hurricane? One that was astrally powerful?" I asked into my comlink. It took her a moment to respond. Last year during hurricane season. It was a pretty mild one though, apparently. This does not look mild to me, nor very last year, I said. What you talking about? Matzo asked. This doesn't look like windblown to me. It's all in good repair, as far as one might expect. It's only on the Astral. There's devastation here, unlike anything I've ever seen. Not in scale, mind you, but in patterns. I felt the ridges and textures of the astral plane around me, attuned myself to the energies, the breakage of the waves. There's completely random destruction here. Whole swathes have been astrally flattened. Some are completely dead, like burn marks. But along perfectly straight borders, the devastation stops and everything is back to normal, pristine even. I see nothing about this on the news or any local forums, Spectra let me know. I was not happy to hear that. Let's go to Slingshot's place. This doesn't seem like it matters right now, Matzo said. He was growing restless, as he always did when something out of his expertise was going on. So we went. I continued to monitor the Astral and little changed. I suspected that, if I got an aerial view of the island, I would find it marred completely by whatever had come through here and selectively steamrolled the place. Matzo kicked down the fence of an overgrown parcel of land. The house standing in the middle of it, once a proud mansion still radiating the faintest mystique of extreme wealth, was almost completely destroyed and reclaimed by nature. Grass, bushes, vines, and palm trees grew wild here, and Matzo handed me a machete so I would clear the way through the thicket, as he held his rifle ready to shoot at anything that might jump at us out of it. We entered a small clearing with the remains of a fire in it, beer cans and plastic packaging strewn all about the place, when I first felt it. I peered through the curtain of greenery ahead, filtered out the pulsating of life force, and got a look at what I knew to be the place that Slingshot operated out of. In the real, it was a former hotel, its wooden walls painted pale green, and pale blue before that, as the flaked-off sections suggested. On the Astral, it was also this, laden with old memories, happy and sad, but it was something more. There was a vortex around it, pure flux, wild energy lashing out in a spiral. Or at least the memory of it was there, though it was so strong that the vortex looked as though it was still present. I had found the epicenter of whatever had ravaged Key West's astral plane. What exactly that had been was still a mystery to me, but it had definitely originated here. I just found my way into some private forums, and apparently something did happen after all, Spectra said. There's not that many people on this island, so naturally also few mages, but 5 days ago apparently a bomb went off. Shamans momentarily lost contact with their patron spirits, hermetics experienced burning sensations all over their body, and adepts were knocked around by the key. 7 fell unconscious and are still in a feverish state. Why is this not on the news? I asked. They're keeping quiet about it. Nobody else experienced anything, just the awakened, and the Astral is recovering. People are very superstitious down here, and the mages didn't want to upset them with questions they do not have the answer to. I hope 5 days ago isn't when Vincenzo Calabarsee came here, I said. Holding on to the faintest of possibilities has always been a specialty of mine. No such luck, Grimcal, Matzo responded instead of Spectra. That was exactly the time. What is it that you're not telling me? I asked. About the Gilded Moon and Calabarsee. Matzo shook his head. You know everything I know. Dan Trevor told me the thing was some piece of art. Calabassee's one of them adept types. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think your boss lied to you, I carefully suggested. Not my fucking boss, chummer. He's a capo. He can say or not say whatever the fuck he wants. I was surprised that there wasn't even a hint of irritation in the orc's voice. You're just fine with Johnson's giving us bad intel now? This was almost harder to believe than the weird things happening on the Astral around here. Loyalty, cocksucker, you gotta have it. I may be a Shadowrunner, but I'm also a made man. That's what I do for my family. Matzo kept scanning the property with the scope of his rifle. I exhaled with resignation. Well, if we're going to go in there tonight, I want to get a closer look at the place. I can't see much of the actual building on the Astral. As I moved, Matzo put a hand on my shoulder to stop me. You're gonna have to do it out, chummer. He pointed at the veranda where, now that I had purposefully blocked out the Astral, I could see a pink-haired, ochre-skinned troll lady going back and forth in a rocking chair. She had a shotgun in her lap. There's also an elf on the roof eating a sandwich, and I spotted a bald guy walking around inside, looking out the windows. Have they spotted us? I asked. Matzo shook his head. Negative, but I do think we should get a move on. We're not gonna get inside or near that building before tonight, I'm afraid. He put down his weapon and started moving through the underbrush. Come on, he said when I didn't immediately follow. Maybe we can go round, get a few more angles on this place. Despite spending most of the day hitting the books, I was able to find out nothing. Mana storms, astral siphons, spirits that smash magic, not even the most outlandish of theories provided me with the answers I needed. Of course, a lot of papers and data were locked not only behind unreasonable paywalls, but inside secret corporate R&D vaults. It was hardly a golden age of science. Selman was of no help either. Despite his strings animating my body, the only reaction I got from him after repeated inquiry was, "Not now, there's important court business going on." I did not enjoy asking him for help in the first place. Laugh at me all you want, but I am very proud of my skills as an academic. That night, when we went to see Slingshot, it was raining. The water was warm, and the air smelled of sand and ozone. There was sheet lightning going on in the distance, a spectacle hanging above the water. We had Acuario pull around and get into position in case we needed to make a quick getaway, but Spectra was confident that this would not be necessary. This boy is gonna be butter in my hands, believe you me. She'd adjusted the shape, size, color, and even texture of her high-end clothes to the personality profile she had compiled about Slingshot. Apparently he was into burgundy cocktail dresses with high collars and narrow necklines, promising much but leaving most of it to the imagination. I could not fault him for it. I noticed small but significant changes in the Astral. It wasn't much, but there had certainly been some regeneration. The vortex around Slingshot's house was also a little fainter. It still made a prickling sensation on my skin when I passed through it, but nothing more than that. I glanced at the spot where Matzo would be hiding in the bushes, ready to burst into the meeting place when trouble arose, spotting his aura through the foliage. The pink-haired troll scanned and patted down Spectra for weapons, disdain at her immaculate beauty clear on her face. She lingered a little longer with me, quite uncomfortably so. Her breath smelled like rotten fish. "You try any of your magic tricks in there? You're getting fucking shot," she growled before letting us pass. The bald man Matzo had spoken of earlier received us in the vestibule. He wore a tattered but clean tuxedo and had shiny silver hands. Lights danced on his blue eyes. "The master will see you now," he informed us in a decidedly fake English accent. His aura was dull to the point of almost being dead. He led us into a living room turned office, a massive wooden desk at its center. There were a ridiculous 5 couches in the room, all of them stained by things I did not want to think about. The lights were fashioned after gas lamps, which was supposed to make the place seem quaint, I'm sure, but really just made it look cheesy. Slingshot turned out to be a lot younger than I expected. He was clearly human, even though his ears had been surgically altered to look elven. Spiky ice blue hair, glowing yellow eyes, and a garishly coloured outfit that appeared pieced together from more go-gangs than this island had ever seen, spoke of a youth with much talent and much more confidence. Spectra was right. This boy would not be able to withstand her. I checked the Astral, finding that, as expected, the epicenter of whatever had wrecked Key West's magical plane had completely flattened this part of it. It wasn't that there was nothing here, it was just all leveled. "Oh, if it isn't Lady Virginia," Slingshot said, trying to sound seductive. "Who's your boyfriend?"
"This is my associate, Mr. Shaw," Spectra said, pointing at me. "He's my bodyguard, and an expert in a great many things."
"Well, I hope you won't guard her body from me for too long. Do sit down over there, though." Slingshot pointed at a chair in the corner of the room. I raised both eyebrows and looked at him questioningly as I took my seat. Was this really how he planned on getting into Spectra's pants?
"Don't worry, Mr. Shaw is a puppy dog," Spectra said, sitting down cross-legged across from Slingshot. I imagine this is when she started doing her actual work. Virtual tentacles would be reaching out to whatever wireless nodes were present in the vicinity, while at the same time she'd already been tunneling through the Matrix for points of attack. What modifications had been made to Spectra's brain to allow her to actively hold a conversation and control her pheromone dispensers while simultaneously decking, I did not know, nor if that was how she went about things at all. I must admit I know little about communications technology beyond the operating basics.
"So, what did you want to see the Slingshot about?" the boy behind the desk asked.
"Well, Mr. Slingshot, I'm looking for an old friend of mine, a distant cousin to be exact. I hear he recently passed through Key West, and you helped him get further into the Caribbean League," Spectra said with a slight southern intonation.
"That's what I do, but people who use the Slingshot usually pay big doubloons, and I don't like betraying their trust. Lady Virginia, not even for a stunning beauty like yourself." Slingshot was practically drooling. I could see a change in his aura as a more instinctive side gained power. I was amused to notice that his was unusually savage.
"But he really is family of mine, and I'm afraid he might be in danger. His name's Vincenzo Calabarsee, but I call him Vinny."
Spectra leaned forward a little bit.
"It's very important to me that I reach him. I can hardly sleep at night for all the worrying about him."
Something flared up in Slingshot's aura when she mentioned Calabarsee, a sort of pulse, disappearing as quickly as it had come. It was too short for me to ascertain what it truly was, but anger and fear were certainly key components. "I may know Mr. Calabarsee, and I may have done business with him. I can assure you the man can take care of himself. Just like I can take care of you and your worries." Slingshot winked. It required all my willpower not to laugh.
"Please, Mr. Slingshot, I need to know where he is. Just tell me where you sent him, and I'll go there first thing tomorrow,"
Spectra begged. "I can feel your pain, Lady Virginia, but if the Slingshot is so easily swayed, how could anyone trust me? You seem trustworthy, but how can I know you really are?" There was heat rising in Slingshot, in a way I had rarely seen anywhere. Boy, did he want to shag Spectra.
"Vinny wears this green dinner jacket everywhere. Have you seen it on him? It looks gorgeous. I bought it for him."
I assumed Spectra had lifted that detail off some surveillance footage she'd found while mining the local matrix for data.
"I remember when we were kids, he never liked the color green much. I just feel so sad and anxious, you know."
"Absolutely, and the Slingshot can give you the relief you need, but it's just difficult for me to give up a client like this, even if it is to a family member." Slingshot was reaching levels of heat that I was surprised he could still form coherent sentences, much less negotiate. I had clearly underestimated his willpower.
"Please, Mr. Slingshot, I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want if you just tell me where you sent Vinny. I'll be so infinitely grateful."
Spectra leaned down even further, moving sideways a little so as to accentuate her curves in the cocktail dress. I could have sworn it had grown tighter over the course of the conversation, too. You know how sometimes you can feel a pimple coming before you can see it on your skin? It's this pressure, the stinging pain when you touch it, even though you can see nothing at all. That was what I felt right there, in the Astral. I looked around the room. It was still flattened, but not quite as much as it had been. It was like there were pockets of air expanding underneath the surface, similar to humidity trapped under a coat of paint expanding in the heat. Something was off. Well, yes, the Slingshot is a serious man, but how could I resist a clearly innocent woman like you? Slingshot burned up on the Astral. "Stop," I said, a little too hesitantly for it to have any effect. "I sent him to Havana." As soon as he said the word, Slingshot's body exploded. Not just on the Astral, but literally. Something burst out of him, taking shape to become one of the most horrific things I had ever seen. Leathery wings with sharp yet rotten teeth at the fringes protruded from his back. His mouth opened, and hands pulled open his jaw until his head was split, only for a carapaced skull that defied all taxonomy to emerge, 4 crab-like stalk eyes glowing red. A pair of arms burst forth from the sides of Slingshot's torso, all 5 fingers ending in bony scythes longer than my hand. His flesh withered and dried up, consumed by the barbed dermis that replaced it. The air bubbles in the Astral all around us popped, and 6 vaguely humanoid shapes seemingly made out of blood emerged from them. Anatomically incorrect figures of flesh and bone, not quite solid and not quite liquid, but something in between. I jumped out of the chair and placed my hand on the ground. A sizzling circle of blue flames with a radius of 2 meters appeared around me, barely including Spectra. The blood spirits shied away from my banishment circle, but whatever monstrosity Slingshot had turned into flung away the desk standing in between it and Spectra, and stepped up to the edge of the flames. I doubted that they would hold it there for long. Spectra rolled backwards off the chair with cat-like grace. Her hands, normally undistinguishable from real appendages save for their perfection, folded back to be replaced by an electric stun gun on her left and a ceramic sword on her right arm. She could handle herself in a fight. There was gunfire and screaming coming from the outside. A moment later, Matzo burst into the room, assault rifle in hand, not hesitating for a second before opening fire on Slingshot. 4 small drones followed him, each capable of firing 9mm rounds on their own. There were 4 small cavities in Matzo's back where they usually rested. I scanned my surroundings, reaching deep and grabbing hold of a rainwater spirit. It swirled into existence as a small cyclone amid the blood spirits, and began shooting frozen droplets at them. Garnering all my strength, I reached farther still, touching the outskirts of the thunderstorm above the ocean, pulling a bolt of lightning into the house. A squat, gaunt creature made of dark clouds and electricity manifested, clearly unhappy to be pulled away from its flock, but forced to serve me for the time being. The thing that had been Slingshot was somewhat stunned from Matzo's barrage, but was regaining its composure when Spectra delivered a powerful shock right to its chest. It stumbled backward a few steps, but seemed unhurt. With a furious roar, it charged through the flames of the banishment circle, slicing at Spectra, but she was faster. With a skillful roll, she moved away, and out of the circle, right into the arms of one of the blood wraiths. The spirit half dissolved and flowed around her, grabbing Spectra from behind, manifesting a hand around her neck. A maw of teeth appeared on its formerly faceless visage, going for her throat. 2 of Matzo's drones focused fire on the thing, and though its wounds closed as soon as they appeared, that did seem to take significant effort on the blood spirit's part.
Spectra used the distraction to slip out of its grasp, spinning to sever it at the hip with her blade arm and delivering a lightning arc to the falling half as it screeched. Matzo stepped into the middle of the room, making use of his torso's 360-degree turning range to swivel around rapidly, delivering suppression fire to all of the blood spirits and Slingshot itself. My rainwater spirit tackled one of the wraiths, engulfing it fully and dissolving it into its now red cyclone as their pure energies clashed. The lightning imp jumped onto the back of another wraith, locking itself tight and delivering gigavolts of shock to it. Slingshot turned its attention to me, howling what I interpreted to be words in an alien language. It charged at me, arms extended, the scythes glowing dangerously in the fake gaslight. A lance of blue flame emerged from my left hand, and I sprayed the creature with it. It definitely slowed down the charge, but Slingshot also didn't start burning the way I had hoped. I dove away at the last moment, feeling a hail of bullets go right above my head from Matzo's gun. This was not the first time such a close call had happened, and it would not be the last. Matzo was such a confident shot that he found this acceptable. I resumed my flaming, hitting Slingshot's hideous back this time, pouring all of my power into it. Its skin hissed as though air was escaping from it. The blue flames had gotten a weak hold, but I could already feel them waning. I turned around the room to get a feel for the situation. The spirit Spectra had severed was focused on stitching its health back together, and she was running around, taking slices at the ones that were not busy being consumed by my rainwater and lightning storm spirits. All of them were in bad shape, and the constant bursts from Matzo's rifle as well as his drones completely blocked their regenerative powers. With an angry scream, Slingshot turned around to me, its scythes growing longer as I looked on. It was time to end this. I grabbed into my jacket for a thumb-sized glass tube of custom-blend goofer dust, and held it in the palm of my hand for a moment as I loaded it with pure magical energy. As Slingshot sliced at me, I threw it at the monster's face, waited for a split second, and then clapped my hands together. The wave of activation energy hit the goofer dust in midair, and it exploded. I shielded my face from the tiny splinters of glass as the black powder unleashed its full force, sending a kinetic wave through the astral that was so powerful it shook the house and its foundation on the physical. I was flung back several meters, and felt a tingling sensation as feeling returned to my extremities. Slingshot was not quite done dissolving into a pool of thick black ooze that was reabsorbed into the astral, while little was left of the other spirits in the room. Slingshot's manservant was nowhere to be seen. Not only is Vincenzo Calabarsee not a physical adept, he is most definitely a drecking blood mage, I said to Matzo, struggling to get back on my feet. The orc nodded, clenching his jaw in anger. His drones, still somewhat disoriented from the goofer dust blast, returned to their slots in his back, integrating seamlessly. First things first, though. We gotta get the fuck out of here.
The moment we were back on the open sea, Matzo's demeanor changed. The serene professionalism was replaced by a restlessness that would have manifested in aggressive pacing had there been enough room inside Carolina to do so.
That was fucked up, he growled. All this demon shit, the fucking vortex whatever. You should have seen this coming.
The vortex obscured the drecking place. There was no way of detecting anything through it, I responded, trying to remain calm. Being in a confined space with Matzo while he was angry was dangerous, but then I was also much too proud to placate him.
This is all the magic shit. It's supposed to be what you're good at. It's your responsibility to cover.
The orc gripped the armrest of his seat so hard that it retained a permanent handprint.
You're a fucking wizard of this fucking team, and if you ain't fucking pulling your fucking weight, I don't fucking know what the fuck type of fucking purpose you fucking serve.
Relax, Matzo, we know where Calabarsee is. Slingshot told us, said Spectra. Oh yeah, Havana, small town Havana, where there's like a dozen families and everybody knows everybody else. Matzo becoming sarcastic was a good sign that he was calming down. Sorry for interrumpir, but I actually know La Habana quite well. I have many contacts there. Acuario informed us over the intercom I had no idea this boat had. Can they find Calabarsee? Spectra asked. Very possible. Would take some work and doublones though. We could probably buy Liga Dollar quite easily, no? I asked. I actually already have some. Spectra was always prepared. Then get us in there as fast as possible. I need to hunt this cocksucker down, Matzo said, much more relaxed than he had been just a moment ago. Perdonen, but I cannot do that. They have probably scrambled something to agarrarnos, so we are going deep. I think tomorrow at noon we will arrive. Being aware that I would be locked in a small box near the ocean floor with the man for many hours to come made me very happy that Matzo had regained his composure. That night, the dream was unusual. Instead of a whimsical fairy glade, I was in a dark cavern, its walls wet with unknown secretions. I couldn't see anything, but knew that these were my surroundings by instinct. A few meters in front of me, a gargantuan entity loomed. I didn't know anything about it, except for the fact that it was something, and it had great power. It also wanted me to be there, in what I could only assume was its lair, which I found reassuring and terrifying at the same time. Like the curtains of a stage, the entity folded away, giving me a look into something it was hosting inside itself. A stage play, except that it was high-definition Astral Tridio. A coin covered in solid gold was spinning on a table, exerting enormous pressure on its surroundings, running over them like a steamroller and changing them into something that was barely recognizable as the astral plane. Exhaust magic spun around with the coin's motion, creating a vortex outside the immediate area it was destroying. Think of it like the event horizon of a black hole, exerting itself over its surroundings, ripping and tearing them apart, realigning them with its own reality. On occasion, the coin's surface would flash white, and a beam of force would shoot through the vortex to annihilate everything in its path, before finally dissipating, leaving behind an area of dead astral with completely straight borders. There was a man standing next to the spinning coin, seemingly immune to its effects, and in fact channeling its power. But the connection was as much a leash as it was an artery of energy. The man just didn't seem to realize it. The presentation ended, and I was flung out of the cavern with extreme force into the cold depths of the ocean. For a moment I hung there, struggling to comprehend what I had just witnessed. Then a pockmarked blue hand grabbed my shoulder and pulled me out of a shallow pond in the forest. Selmin was the only one around. The king and his court were nowhere to be seen.
"Where the hell have you been? How did you do that?" he asked.
You mean you didn't do that?
I scarcely know what that was. Something ripped you away from me when I was about to transport you here. Never seen anything quite that powerful before.
Selmin grimaced. I think it tried to tell me something about the artifact I am currently hunting, and the guy who has it. Imbued with even the least amount of consciousness, I found that pretty obvious.
"The Gilded Moon, is it?"
Selmin asked, suspicion in his voice. You've been listening in again, have you?
"I do pass all of your sensory input, so yes, it's difficult not to. And I hate your vapid daily life," Selmin said.
Do you know anything about the Gilded Moon? I asked. Couldn't hurt.
Unfortunately, no.
Selmin made a sound reminiscent of someone grinding their teeth.
It's time to wake up. You've been sleeping for 8 hours. Be glad the king did not miss your presence at court today.
Before I could say anything in response, Selmin pushed me back into the water. I woke up to the sight of Matzo sleeping in his seat. He was perfectly upright and didn't make the slightest noise as he breathed. In this state, the orc's face looked almost peaceful. But how was I able to hear just how quiet Matzo was being? The engines of Carolina were not running. I could hear the masses of water moving around the hull and the cold of the deep ocean penetrating through to my bones. Spectra was curled up in a corner near the cockpit door, the glow of a direct-to-retina tridio flickering over her eyes. "What's going on?" I asked her quietly. She needed a moment to react, turning off her tridio. "We're drifting to throw the scent off. At least that's what Acuario said," she explained. "Did the Key West situation really make such waves in such a short period of time?" I asked. Spectra shook her head. "It's the Cubans. With the Ungan competition going on as it is, their security is tight. You were right to have me look into that. Apparently one of the biggest contenders is in Havana right now. His name is Gregory Camacho, and a lot of people are not exactly fans of the idea that he's half white. The Haitians have already mounted almost a dozen assassination attempts. And to think that the position of head Ungan wasn't even a thing before a dead dragon invented it." I shook my head. I could understand the desire to get one's hands on a bag of dragon toenails, but to transform a whole region of the world into a magical war zone, for the mere idea of that happening after one's own passing, that was unimaginable to me. "Don't worry, Acuario can get us in. He's dealt with tighter security in the past," said Spectra. "My hope is that Havana will be relatively clear of mages by power of the authorities. The Cubans want to protect Camacho at all costs, so finding Calabarsee out of all of them should prove doable. Or the opposite is the case and the city is swarming with every kind of spellcaster the island has to offer," I countered. "Even if you're right, that'll mean trouble for me. If Calabarsee is truly as well connected as Matzo said, and Slingshot actually managed to get him into the city, the Titan magical security could work in his favor." "Fair enough, but I like my version better," Spectra responded. "I'd rather get around tangible security than try to find a needle in a haystack." When she was quiet like this, one could almost be fooled into thinking that she was sometimes a worried young woman, instead of an unstoppable force of nature. A rumble went through the submersible. With a yank, the engines were turned back on. Matzo almost fell out of his chair, opened his eyes, scanned the perimeter, and went immediately back to sleep. To this day, I still have no idea where he got his military training. It was well past noon when we arrived in Havana. Acuario had parked Carolina in a small cave that could only be reached through an underwater passageway. It was barely large enough to fit the boat, and the 3 battery-powered halogen lamps clinging to the ceiling did not adequately illuminate the rickety gangway for anyone without cyber eyes. The sound of smashing water resonated against the slick, moss-covered walls, giving the place a claustrophobic feel I was not comfortable with. A heavy metal door led into the basement of a hardware store, where a teenager made an acne-speckled face of shock and horror at the sight of us. Acuario gave the kid a wink and threw him a few bills in Liga dollar. Upstairs, an ancient-looking troll let himself be hugged by the pilot, clearly uncomfortable with the show of intimacy, but respectful to the person who was clearly his boss. "I am a silent partner in this business. I even have un apartamento up the stairs," Acuario explained to me as we walked out onto the blazing hot afternoon streets of Havana. "You would not believe how easy it is to launder dinero in a communist state." The heavy coat I was wearing made the heat situation much worse than it needed to be, but I was not about to take it off. The notion of my pale skin coming into contact with the rays of this sun made me feel like a sausage on the grill. I used the mouth spray, not because I had that "you smell" taste in my mouth, but because I was hoping the menthol would cool me down a bit. It didn't. Matzo, with the military-grade cooling systems in his chrome, looked uncomfortable. He'd had to hide all his weapons, meaning that it would take at least a full second before he could start shooting at people if the need arose. Even so, military police patrols gave him suspicious looks. Luckily, Spectra was there to draw their eyes onto her instead, which she did with a level of skill and precision that I found it hard to believe she wasn't working some kind of magic. "So, your contacts, what did they say?" I asked Acuario, whom we had all been following on the assumption that he knew where he was going.
If he didn't, that would certainly be embarrassing. They are working on it. I was only able to contact them when we had aguas claras because, it's never a good idea to broadcast when people are on your ass. He laughed, and even though his joke had not been particularly funny, it was so contagious that I found myself laughing with him. We're having dinner with a friend of mine tonight. He's the Novacoque king of La Habana, but he also trades in information. So why are we going out now, then, if dinner is tonight? I was not keen on a guided tour of the city while the only torrential downpour was coming from my temples. Because we have to buy him a gift.
We met the Novacoque king of Havana outside a small restaurant in the middle of the old town. The light of the setting sun brought out beautiful shades in the pale blues, yellows, and pinks of these ancient buildings. Cars were banned from streets as narrow as this one, as many of the overhanging balconies had to be supported by external scaffolds. Life had poured out onto the asphalt as a communal space, and it was as though everyone shared a living room. Tables and chairs of wood, plastic, and rattan occupied most of the street, alongside market stalls and some open kitchens producing delicious smells. Drones of all colors, shapes, and sizes whirred overhead, some of them property of Palmiro Marzo V, and traditional music from family homes was competing with the thrumming of electronic sounds coming from the rooftops. The Astral was aglow with happy vibes and community spirit, though there was an underlying note of fear, desperation, and willful ignorance. Sitting at an expansive table all on his own was an overweight middle-aged man gorging himself on a platter of seafood. He had thick, curly salt and pepper hair, large, glossy brown eyes, and laughter lines you could drive a truck through. His simple white t-shirt and jeans outfit was protected from the fallout of his feast by a large paper bib. When he spotted us making our way through the crowd, he shouted in a voice that should by rights have belonged to a troll.
Miren, viene mi amigo, el Acuario.
Some people sitting near him clapped and smiled at us as though we were family returning home from a long journey. Grandmas with wrinkled faces, young boys with ruffled hair, grown men with bare chests, and women in tasteful evening clothes, they all seemed to know exactly who the man was, what he did, and the kind of power he held.
¡Melocotón! Acuario shouted. Si continúa ahí, en unos cuantos años lo van a llamar Gordinflón, eh?
Despite my first teacher's insistence that any wizard should know Latin, I don't speak Spanish even conversationally. But I did understand the meaning of that comment, and it did not put me at ease. The whole street went silent. Even the music seemed to cut out for a moment. People were waiting with bated breath, looking back and forth between Acuario and Melocoton, anxiety on their faces. Several long heartbeats later, the gangster broke out into wheezing laughter, slapping his hand on the table so hard that one platter of prawn shells jumped off and fell onto the asphalt.
Hijo de puta como siempre,
Melocoton roared, beckoning us to his table. Patrons from surrounding tables hastily vacated their seats so waiters could move them for us instead.
¿Qué te pasó, amigo mío? ¿Cómo va la vida?
Melocoton's face was still red from laughing. He and Acuario exchanged some rapid-fire chit-chat in Spanish, presumably the small talk of old friends. Acuario seemed to be quite the comedian, as he had Melocoton holding his sides more than once. Spectra, too, gave him an occasional chuckle. "You speak Spanish?" I asked her. In retrospect, I should have not been surprised that she did. "Of course I do," she responded, frowning. "I speak every major language in North America, and that includes those spoken by immigrants." I noticed when Melocoton nodded his head toward us, and asked Acuario,
¿Los yumas son gringo o qué?
Acuario nodded, then pointed at me. "Lo otro dos sí, pero él es de Inglaterra." Melocoton's face lit up at that moment.
He looked at me, and for the first time I could see the sheen of his metallic teeth.
England!
He shouted as though he was talking to a deaf person.
La Queen! Good pub! Fish and potato chip!
He pushed over a platter with a yellow pie covered in orange-red sauce.
You make the good beer, but food is shit!
He said as he handed me a clean fork. After throwing Acuario a questioning look, I took a bite. It was delicious. The tastes of crisp bacon, rich fish sauce, and what I believe was banana flowed together so well in my mouth that the sensation was almost explosive. Clearly, my face communicated this, because Melocoton once again broke out into laughter and invited me to keep the plate and continue eating.
Have you brought me present?
He asked, a gleam in his eyes. I nodded and pointed at Matzo, who pulled a 6-pack of cream soda cans out of a bag. Melocoton ordered a soy calf and pushed plates with forks over to Spectra, Acuario, and Matzo. I noticed that, unlike every single other man we had met all day, he had not given Spectra more than a cursory glance. There was a sudden change in Melocoton's behavior as what appeared to have been more of a table ritual than anything else was concluded. He waited for his soy calf to arrive, now much more businesslike than before. The mug the beverage came in was huge, but also only half full. Melocoton opened one of the cans of cream soda and poured it into the soy calf, waited for a moment, then took a sip with a satisfied expression on his face. Acuario had explained to me that he made a point of not buying cream soda himself, but always expecting people who met with him to bring it as a small gift. Melocoton looked at Acuario, and the two began to speak in Spanish at a speed that even Spectra seemed to have difficulty understanding. I believed to hear the name Vincenzo Calabarsee being mentioned several times. There were no more jokes, no more exuberant gestures, not even many tonal shifts. It was as though both men had suddenly become different people entirely. I trusted Acuario to deal with this on his own, and I trusted Spectra to keep an ear on the conversation to make sure my trust in Acuario wasn't misplaced. Instead, I decided to focus my attention on the savory banana bacon pie I had been given. For a man in my line of business, a good meal, a really good meal, is rare. Not because I can't afford it, because I can. I just don't have the time. It's fast food, instant noodles, or microwave-ready meals for me. Often I'm not even close enough to any good establishments to get a nice meal even if I wanted to. I had just slurped down the last spoonful of the fish sauce when Acuario and Melocoton fell back into the flamboyant Latin routine and seemed to be saying goodbye to each other. Money changed hands. Both of them were laughing again, and Melocoton even stood up and took off his bib to give our pilot a hug. He then proceeded to shake each of our hands in turn, making it unmistakably clear that, though he had enjoyed our company and was happy to do business, his hospitality had ended for tonight. I bid him goodbye and freshened up with the mouth spray. Seafood usually leaves strong smells with me. When we had left the street and made our way back to Acuario's hardware store, Matzo was the one who grew impatient first.
The fuck you say? Where's Calabarsee at?
Temo que is outside the reach of anyone official. He lives in a corporate apartment edificio called Flotalandia. And how much did that information cost us? I wanted to know. You see, that is the curioso thing. It was just a cursory fee. He said that we would be doing the whole island a favor if we took Calabarsee out.
Flotalandia was a luxury apartment complex located in a small bay on the eastern side of the city. It was a floating island, a group of buildings 6 to 8 stories high, built in a streamlined, pseudo-organic style around a small park. Bright wood, mirror glass, and coral-textured roughcast were surrounded by innumerable planter boxes filled with colorful flowers, draping vines, and ferns gently swaying in the coastal wind. 2 pontoon bridges connected it to the mainland to the east and west,
but both were patrolled by armed guards and could only be accessed by residents or people with a visitor's pass. Even in a communist state like Cuba, the megacorps did business and wanted special concessions for it. Gated communities like Flotalandia were exactly the kind of place where their executives could relax away from the rabble of the city and be ignored by the government. Calabarsee lived on the second floor of the northernmost building under the assumed name of Joe Drexler, and according to Melocoton, he was also the true boss of the complex. We staked the place out for 3 days before deciding to finally make our move. We learned the security routes and schedules, tagged and researched everyone who entered and left over the bridges or the helicopter pad. Calabarsee himself only made 2 appearances, both of them on the balcony. The first was a late breakfast, the second a late-night drink. He did not leave the apartment once. We could have taken him out then and there, but we also needed to get the Gilded Moon, and the risk of triggering some sort of alarm was too high. It was strange seeing the man for the first time. He did look like in the pictures, a broad-shouldered, average-height fighter with black hair and ice-blue eyes, but there was something different about him. Where his hair had been wild and unkempt, it was now cropped short and neat. The laid-back posture that Tridio conveyed was replaced with the disciplined stature of a perfectly straight spine. Even his flamboyant tendency to wear colourful geese and martial arts medals to dinner events was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he wore dark trousers and bright t-shirts. No jewelry, no embellishment, no nothing. Spectra had run into difficulties with the security system. Despite several attempts, she was unable to get into the deeper layers, much to her frustration. "I've never seen condos with security like this," she'd complained on the second night, pacing up and down in the small kitchen of Acuario's apartment above the hardware store. "They've got stolen and modified ASIC, blacker than the Void, Renraku heuristic sniffers trained against the best deckers in the world, and indestructible Ares firewalls of a caliber that I have never encountered. There's a goddamn spider on site!" "I hope he ain't noticed you trying to get into his fortress," Matzo said. "Please, I'm better than that. He's seen my attacks, but I disguise them as random vandalism. If you have cybersecurity like that, you probably expect that kind of shit to happen on the daily." "See, that is true. Any megacorp enclave in Cuba has security that is extreme. They really don't want the government to fill them out," Acuario explained. He was making scrambled eggs. But tonight was the night. Spectra had found a way to feed junk data to the sonar sensors, and would fake a minor incident on the south side of Flotalandia in order to draw the surveillance drones there. It would turn out to be nothing, but give the 3 of us enough time to scale the walls up to Calabarsee's apartment. We were standing on top of Carolina, having exited the boat through a hatch in the roof. The black chassis I stood on was barely more than a few centimeters above the waterline and, in the dark of night, probably quite invisible to anyone watching from the coast. The astral plane around Flotalandia was, and had consistently been, intact. Bloodhound spirits floated around the complex, and they had mauled a stray water spirit that approached the complex from the sea the moment it had gotten too close. Some of the dogs were getting suspicious, and I knew they would pounce and try to devour us the moment we began scaling the walls. Luckily, I had prepared for that. A few taps on my comlink opened a number of plastic boxes placed strategically in a 1-kilometer radius around Flotalandia. Inside were bloody, delicious, astrally active steaks, the recipe for which I had learned from a breeder of exactly this kind of spirit in Plymouth. It only took the bloodhounds a few moments before their discipline broke, and when the first one stormed off to a box floating in the water, the others followed, not wanting to miss out. I gave the signal, and Matzo aimed a huge harpooning rifle at a wooden beam between Calabarsee's apartment and his neighbors. Moments later, a dull thump and a green light on the gun informed us that the claw was in place, and the cable suspended from it was safe to climb. Matzo went first, not only because he was our usual vanguard, but also because if the beam held him, it would most certainly hold Spectra and myself. Carolina bobbed up by a significant amount when Matzo's weight was no longer on her, and I stepped back as far as possible from him, not wanting to be crushed under his immense weight if he slipped and fell. After he had crawled into a small garden space just above the beam, Spectra followed, fastening herself to the side of Calabarsee's balcony in an unnatural position. I went last, as always, because of my obvious disadvantages. I could have summoned an air spirit to levitate me up there, but I did not want to risk attracting the attention of the bloodhounds. Instead, I put on my climbing gloves and began pulling myself up the rope. Where moments earlier I had been happy about the cool sea breeze, suddenly I was sweating like a boar in the jungle. I'd never been much of an athlete, but I was always good enough not to be picked last in school. Climbing ropes, even if it was just for a few meters, was a different game. I could hear Salmon cackling softly in the back of my mind as he actuated into motion the mental commands my nervous system was no longer able to communicate to my muscles. What had taken Matzo and Spectra about 30 seconds, I needed 5 minutes for, and at the end I was breathing so heavily that Matzo shot me an angry look. Just when I had recovered some of my energy and wanted to give the okay to move onto the balcony and into Calabarsee's apartment, I heard voices. Our target was greeting someone, and I could hear it through an open window. "Sagredo, finally! I've been waiting for you for days," he complained. "I apologize, Vincente, but it has become difficult for me to enter the country. The Cubans are getting suspicious of my corporate affiliation," a man with a clear voice and strong Aztlana accent noted. "So send someone, I don't care. This is a dangerous place for me to be, and you guys said that I would be welcomed in Tenochtitlan the moment I do this for you. Not only that, but you will be a fabulously rich man in a country where the possibilities are endless. And do not worry, this place is perfectly safe, Vincente," the Aztlana said. "I know that. I'm the one who made it that way. The security guys in Flotalandia are my security guys. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't call me Vincente. In this building, I'm Joe Drexler, and my name is not Vincente anyway," Calabarsee complained. "I'm Italian, don't forget that." "Of course, I apologize." The Aztlana was phenomenally soft-spoken. "The strike team is in place to assist and extract you. Gregory Camacho is currently at a place called Hacienda El Invierno, a few kilometers southeast of Tapaste. It is heavily fortified, but with your current level of power and the support of our strike team, it should be no problem. Use the Gilded Moon to destroy Camacho, then we will airlift you out of there and fly straight to Tenochtitlan." Camacho. That was the name of the Cuban candidate currently in the race for head Ungan of the Caribbean League. Was Aztechnology meddling in the competition? Was his competitor backed by Aztlan? I didn't have much time to mull it over. Sagredo stepped onto Calabarsee's balcony, the railing of which I just so happened to have my feet on. I lunged forward, landing half a meter in front of the confused Aztlana. Before he could react, I charged ahead, grabbed his torso, and threw him over the railing. Behind me, Matzo landed on the balcony, the impact making it shake so much that I was half afraid it would break off. I spun around, and threw a quick but powerful ball of blue flame into the apartment, where Calabarsee had been just a few paces behind Sagredo. It exploded the moment it made contact with its target, throwing him back 5 meters and into a bar. Bottles of expensive wine and liquor shattered and fell to the ground. For centuries, people had believed diseases, addictions, and psychoses to be the result of demonic interference, even possession of a mortal soul. While we know today that diseases of the mind are often neurological in nature, that did not mean that there weren't also spirits involved from time to time. Usually the kind of spirits that had learned to insert themselves into liquor bottles were incarnations of hedonism or frustration, Not particularly powerful, but they would cause entire parties to become blackout drunk, or cause the occasional suicide over a broken heart. Sometimes, however, they mutated into something much more dangerous and powerful. I grabbed hold of the spirit before it dissipated, and forced it to become manifest in the physical world, almost falling over as I wrestled with a being of such power. Black filaments rose from the liquid spilled on the floor, coalescing into a dark mass. A human, grey-skinned and horribly deformed, its head tilted to the side, eyes nothing but black void, drooling from a toothless mouth. Its arms were so long that they pulled the spirit's huge, powerful hands across the floor. I had manifested a spirit of alcoholism. To my surprise, Calabarsee laughed. It was an arrogant, maniacal cackle, the kind of sound mad scientists produce when they are about to be victorious in their plot to take over the world. Next to me, Matzo opened fire, his rifle screeching like an eagle as 25 small caliber rounds per second came out of its nozzle. The mirror glass of the balcony shattered, and the bullets cut right past my spirit and into Calabarsee. Except they didn't. Out of nowhere, a convex shield so powerful that it would have taken me at least 10 minutes to build had appeared before him, projected from his hand. A circle of golden light radiated from his sternum, where the gilded moon seemed to be attached to his body. How powerful was this thing? Calabarsee's shield swallowed the bullets, trapping them like a thick gel. Calmly, as if he had all the time in the world, he got back to his feet and stretched his neck. "Whoever paid you to do this, they didn't pay you enough," he said, his voice magically augmented to carry over the howl of Matzo's rifle, the muzzle of which had begun to glow hot red. He stopped firing, holding the gun to his side in one hand while pulling a pistol out of his holster with the other. "Watch this," Calabarsee said to me, then made a chopping motion. Like a cord snapping, I felt my connection to the alcoholism spirit break. Calabarsee had taken control over my spirit, just like that. I had a bad feeling about the whole situation. Though they may have seemed that way at first, the creature's arms were anything but lethargic. The alcoholism spirit snapped them forward like two whips, and I was only barely able to duck to avoid having my head crushed when the two hands met in the air. Giving an irritated moan, the spirit pulled itself toward me, ignoring Matzo, who was shooting more rounds into Calabarsee's shield. It was fast, too. When I looked up, its disgusting, vaguely human face was just centimeters from my own, its breath reeking of sweat and booze. It jerked back when electricity snapped through its body. Spectra had pulled herself up onto the balcony and hit it with her stunner. It was a matter of sheer luck that alcoholism spirits did not react well to being tased, and I doubted that Spectra had been aware of this. "Get down!" she shouted and launched a small object at Calabarsee from her other arm. Momentary surprise on his face, Calabarsee plopped his shield from convex to concave as though it were made out of clay. The explosive was redirected toward us in full force. The spirit took most of the blast and was disintegrated by it. A rug, table, chairs, splinters of glass, and potted plants were blasted out onto the balcony. When the shockwave hit me, it lifted me up and threw me out toward the water, painfully slamming my leg into the railing. I could already feel myself smashing against the concrete hard surface of the water when my fall was stopped. Though the inventory of Calabarsee's apartment continued to fall out into the bay, Matzo, Spectra, and I were now suspended in the air, not even capable of moving on our own. Shaking his head and clicking his tongue, Calabarsee stepped out onto the balcony, the bullets trapped in his shield falling to the ground as he released them. "You know, I picked this apartment because the only way you could get into it was from the open ocean," he said. The gilded moon still glowing brightly on his chest, he looked down into the water, directly at Carolina. With a casual raising of his arm, he pulled the boat up into the air, holding it still just below us. The motor howled as Acuario engaged whatever turbo booster system he had installed, but it was no use. After shaking his head again, Calabarsee closed his fist, and Carolina was crushed like a tin can in a hydraulic press. "Shame about the boat," he said, then let go of it. The crumpled mess of plastic and steel that moments before had been a high-tech submersible crashed back into the water, sinking like a stone. Calabarsee walked back into his apartment, pulling us inside after him without even moving his hands. A team of soldiers, heavily armed and armored, flooded into the place, lowering their weapons when they saw that Calabarsee had everything under control. "About time you showed up," he said, somewhat jokingly. "We are terribly sorry, Mr. Drexler, sir," one of them said, an American accent coming out of her helmet speakers. "Your punishment will be that you didn't get to have any of the fun," he said. "Get a look at the chrome on these two, see if you can disable it." "Yes, Mr. Drexler, sir."
You fucking cocksucker! I'll fucking kill you, traitorous pig!
Matzo roared, still suspended in the air, unable to move. "Ah, if it isn't Matzo the Fifth!" Calabarsee exclaimed. "I'm not surprised Don Trevor hired someone from Jersey to handle this. He wouldn't risk anyone from New York."
You have no fucking honor, you fucking piece of shit! Fuck you!
Now this is interesting. Calabarsee turned to me, treating Matzo as though he wasn't even there, which only encouraged the orc to find more and heavier insults to hurl at him. "Your patron spirit is... I've never seen anything like it. But then I haven't been able to identify people's patron spirits for a long time, so I might be inexperienced." He laughed. "In any event, say your goodbyes, chummer." He touched the gilded moon through his shirt, took a deep breath, and whispered a few syllables that reverberated through the astral with power. All feeling drained from my body, I was not able to move before, but now I couldn't even try. I knew it before I realized it. Calabarsee had just severed my bond with Selman. Just like that, he had annulled the compact I had with my mentor spirit, and thereby left me the quadriplegic that I was. "Should we execute them, sir?" the commando asked. I could barely hear her over Matzo's continued swearing. "No, I don't want you to break anything. I still owe some old friends money, and I'd hate to leave this life behind with unpaid debts. It's time to make one last charitable donation to the Zobap." I was locked inside my own body, unable to move even my eyelids, and I was dying. Just like I'm not your everyday kind of shaman, I am also not your everyday kind of quadriplegic. Many years ago, I worked for the London Metropolitan Police. Just your standard magical investigator. It's a shit job. Because of the widespread corruption, nobody outside the Met trusts you, and nobody inside the Met trusts anyone from the Met either, because they know about the corruption. This goes triple if you're a magic user. You're also utterly expendable, no matter how good you are. I was investigating a gas explosion down in Bromley when I first met the man who would do this to me. I was one of the most knowledgeable hermetics in the service back then, and the owner of the building that had blown up, a man by the name of Satterley, was convinced that it had been a local mage gang. To cut this short, I will say that it was indeed a mage gang that had caused this explosion, but that gang was headed by Satterley himself, and he was hoping to get the Met moving against his greatest rivals. He had expected me to be stupider than I was, and later more bribable than I was. It doesn't pay to be an honest cop, my supervisor at the time had always told me, and I still wish I had listened to him. I used to visit my parents every other weekend. They live in Canterbury and are among the wealthier citizens of the Sixth World. I could already see the house I had grown up in at the end of the road when Satterley and some of his whiz kids jumped me. I had gotten too close to the truth of the investigation and needed to be taken out. I don't remember much of what happened, but I do remember that he left me for dead, apparently having underestimated the power of my protective charms. My nervous system had been fried by a curse. A special amulet I had once paid absurd amounts of money for had shielded my brain and took on the duties of breathing and circulating blood for a few hours. The vast majority of my neurons simply died. I could still hear, albeit poorly, and I would have been able to see if I had opened my eyes. But my senses of heat, touch, taste, smell, orientation were gone. I remember being in the hospital from the sounds the machines made. But with almost no sensory input to speak of, my mind wandered and my soul followed. For over 3 months, I wandered the astral, the inner and outer spheres, worlds and dimensions so alien that I cannot describe what it felt like to be there. That's how I met Selman. I stumbled through what might have been a portal or a bridge into a cavern where giant crystals absorbed starlight produced by moss hanging from the ceiling. A blue-skinned humanoid with a terribly deformed face was fetching water from a spring. He did not believe in chance meetings, and told me that this was a sign from the Great Mother that his rise at court was imminent. It took me a while to accept him as my mentor spirit, to give him control over my body, allowing him to become my nervous system. In exchange, he got to parade me around and sell the services of my astral body to others in his court. When I finally woke up, it turned out that, because Satterley and his gang had attacked me outside of London, legally I had not been hurt in the line of duty. Someone I considered a friend at the time had the decency to tell me that Satterley had paid him off to drop the case. He also told me that Satterley was under the impression that I was dead, and considering that he knew where my parents lived, it was better if he was not relieved of that illusion. My friend called up a mate of his, a doctor who owed him a favor. He faked my death certificate. My parents were informed about the tragedy of my passing and told that they could not see the body. I was shipped out of the country. My pact with Selman allowed me to build a new life up in Massachusetts. But Selman was gone now, our connection severed. Considering Calabarsee's power, I would not have been surprised if he had killed my former mentor spirit. I did remember the sounds of being loaded up in a van with Matzo and Spectra, but I didn't have a special amulet this time around, and the Grim Reaper was already reaching out to grab a hold of me. My soul went into the astral, flowing on the currents of ley lines without direction. Time lost all meaning. Every fraction of a second felt like an eternity, and eternities passed over the course of seconds. I found myself climbing a mountain made of flames with a group of green-skinned, boar-faced humanoids that I knew but had never met before. I sailed across a desert of crystallized blood in a ship made of bones, watching the horizon for a tree of tears. I remember spending many years in a city on a snowflake, drinking vanilla milk and smoking chocolate cigars. I hunted beasts that looked like accordions made of flesh across plains of yellow grass, and was in turn hunted by werewolves that could transform into shadow some eternities after that. I experienced life, death, madness, sanity, love, hate, fury, calm, stupor, elation, enlightenment, hedonism, infinity, confinement, destruction, creation, absurdity, and reason. I experienced everything, and even though I know I was myself in every vignette I was a part of, I do not remember how, when, or why. It was only when I washed up on the shore of an alien beach that I regained my full faculties, and became keenly aware of the predicament that my physical body and friends were in. I looked up at the sky, which seemed devoid of all color and shade. The memory of stars was faint, and would soon be forgotten. An enormous bank of clouds hovered above the barren island I had just arrived at, silent lightning zipping across it, taking physically impossible paths. An entire city hung suspended from the storm front's belly, organic skyscrapers protruding from it like stalactites. I could see the lightning bolt coming towards me. It moved almost slowly, gently, in my direction, and I knew that it was meant for me. Even if I had moved faster than it could travel, I knew that it would catch me. So I simply waited for it to pick me up and pull me inside that great city. In a flash, it brought me to a round room, the color of its walls changing the moment I was able to identify them. Organic tubing pulsated behind them like blood vessels. Through a large window, I could see the city bustling with activity. The lightning bolts were actually gigantic millipedes that swallowed people waiting on large platforms, moving across the buildings in seemingly random patterns, but always spitting out their passengers in the correct locations. There was a harumph behind me. A sky-blue bird almost twice my size stood on 2 legs behind an assortment of levers. Its beak was decorated with scarlet scrollwork, and its multichromatic eyes were faceted like those of a fly. "Why am I here?" I asked. "Someone paid for your recovery," the Birdman responded in a surprisingly human voice. "It took us forever to find you, but don't worry. We were able to recoup our losses in memories." How much time has passed, I wanted to know, already imagining myself having been long cut up on a Zobop organ-leggers dissection table. "Does it matter?" the Birdman asked. "Very much," I said. "No, it doesn't," was the response. The Birdman pulled some levers on his console, and the entire city rumbled. Like changing a channel, the island below us disappeared and was replaced by a vast river of white light. Black particles whirled around in its violent rapids. "You pilot this thing?" I asked. "Me and others. Almost all others." I realized that the black particles being thrown around by the river were storm fronts similar to this one. No, actually they were this one. The very same city in the clouds. Different instances of the same place at different points in time and space. I was on some of them, just like I was on this one, and I would be from the beginning to the very end of existence. The river swallowed us up, and the city was dragged below the surface. As suddenly as the island had disappeared, a vast verdant forest became visible below. Before I knew it, the ceiling over my head opened, and a giant white millipede dipped its face down to swallow me whole. Moments later, I was standing in a fairy glade, and a bolt of lightning zipped back up to the Cloud City. There was a deep thrumming, and the city disappeared in a flash of light. Around me, the king's court was gathered. Golden-eyed, fancy-dressing fairy looked at me with pity, horror, and disgust. Sitting on his throne of thorns, scepter and chalice in hand, the king looked at me with his non-face. Teal-skinned, deformed servants stood around him, looking at me with expressions similar to those of the other fairy. Only Selman was facing away from me, kneeling before the king. It seemed to me that he looked hurt and frail, burn marks now marring his face in addition to his usual deformities. "You are Callum Grimshaw," the king said to me. It was both question and factual statement. "Most people call me Grimcal, and I appreciate you using my real name. I was in a weird situation. I had never spoken to the king before, and I don't think he ever noticed my existence. But here he was, addressing me before the entire court. I had no idea whether this was a good or a bad thing. "You have encountered Gilded Moon." Once again, the sentence was as much a statement as it was a question. "Unfortunately so, yes. A man named Vincenzo Calabarsee has it. He used it to sever the connection between me and Selman," I explained. "It is not possible for one to own Gilded Moon. Gilded Moon owns one. It is a thing of such power that few can begin to comprehend what it can do. It is more ancient than the sixth world, more ancient than the fourth world, more ancient than the second world, and more ancient than the nilth world. Your kind has never encountered something as dangerous as Gilded Moon." I saw what it did to the Astral around Key West. It's devastating for sure. I can even imagine someone learning how to use it as a sort of magical nuke. But it does have limits. There it was again, my undying optimism.
Your mind lacks the faculties to understand, Callum Grimshaw. Gilded Moon is at a fraction of its power. When it has consumed all magic in your world, it will still be at a fraction of its power. The court you call At's technology is trying to use it for their own gain. They do not understand that it will consume its current slave when it attaches to its new one, and the new one will be in a position to amass enough power for it to turn upon those who believe themselves to be its masters.
A year's worth of dragon toenail clippings, I whispered. If this thing consumed magical power, that had to be a whole oil field worth of it. If the Gilded Moon is such an ancient and powerful artifact, why was it in the personal art collection of a New York crime boss?
It was lost, banished by an alliance of beings that would never have cooperated under different circumstances. Only after it had taken control of its current slave did Gilded Moon create the impetus within At's technology to set in motion the plan that would bring it to a more powerful slave.
I suppose, but what do you want me to do about it?
You must destroy Gilded Moon. You are the only one in a position to do so.
I don't know if you know this, but I am reasonably certain that I'm currently on an operating table, about to be cut into pieces by the Zobop and sold to the highest bidder. Besides, how would I even go about destroying an artifact that is, as you say, older than the Nilth world?
I will replace Selman as what you refer to as your mentor spirit. You will be more powerful through me than you could have ever been through him.
I could feel the weight of the offer extended to me. For a lone spirit, Selman had been exceptionally powerful. I could scarcely imagine how much greater the entity he served was.
Gilded Moon cannot be destroyed, but its conduit can. With its current power, doing so would be easy even for a mortal such as yourself. Melt it down through means magical or mundane, and it shall be cut off from all worlds until it finds the strength to return.
That sounds surprisingly easy and convenient. I was suspicious, but then the king seemed desperate to have this thing destroyed. What reason could he possibly have to lie to me about something like this?
Under the condition that you will destroy the current conduit of Gilded Moon before it can gain control of another slave. Do you accept me as your mentor spirit, Callum Grimshaw?
I don't know why I hesitated. This was my only way forward if I even wanted to stay alive at all. But I suppose not taking a moment to mull over decisions like this would be a little reckless. I accept. I accept you as my mentor spirit.
Then so it shall be,
the king agreed. I felt power flow through me as our compact became manifest, our connection truth. This was different than the solid, palpable force Selman had provided me with. The king's power was vast, ethereal, ungraspable in its totality. The king turned his non-face to look at Selman, who was kneeling on the floor before him.
My servant Selman, you have proven yourself worthy of regaining the position you once held. Choose the one who would replace you.
Selman rose, a wide grin on his face. He turned toward the assembled courtiers, and all of them backed away from him, trying not to meet his gaze.
Cavalier, don't hide from me,
Selman said, excitement over the power he had been given in his voice.
Selman, no. This is not right,
one of the fairy lords responded. He was shorter than most of the others, and dressed in a doublet made of pearlescent dragonfly wings.
Have I not always treated you with respect? It is true that you have been good to me. For 5 centuries you have been good to me. But I think you are forgetting what happened 6 centuries ago, where you did to me what I am about to do to you.
No, my king, please do not let him do this. It is unfair.
Gavalier pleaded, but the king ignored him. Selmin grabbed a hold of Gavalier's shoulder, and the transformation process began. My former mentor spirit's skin went from teal to pale orange, the warts, boils, scars, and deformities on his face disappearing, changing it into a handsome visage of perfect symmetry. The pupils in his eyes faded away as they became golden, and his tall hat disintegrated into a mane of long, flowing blonde hair. Even his ultramarine robe changed, becoming a bright red tunic frilled with dancing flames. Gavalier's transformation was the opposite. His face changed into the same disgusting grimace that all servants of the king's court wore. The gold in his eyes disappeared, and his skin turned teal. The magnificent doublet transformed into an identical robe to the one that Selmin had worn, and his hair flowed upward into a tall, conical hat. Selmin and Gavalier had traded places. One had gone from servant to courtier, and the other from courtier to servant.
Now it is time for you to return to your world, Callum Grimshaw. I have repaired the nervous system of your body. There will be no surrogate movement with me.
The king showed me a pathway into the woods.
Go and fulfill your side of our compact.
I awoke on the dirty concrete floor of a Zobop cell. The sound of crickets and frogs came in through a tiny air slit, accompanied by the smell of foul water and dry dirt. Even though it was late in the night, the heat was almost unbearable. The cell was illuminated by cold xenon light coming in from the hallway through the thick bars of a great door. The once white wall tiles were covered in years of grime. I moved, rising to my feet. It felt different somehow, smoother, even though I had not done it in years. I was in charge of this, not some proxy animating my muscles. Don't get me wrong, with Selmin there had never been any delay. I was as quick as my mind could be, but this felt more direct, more private, more self-proprietary. I liked it very much. Though they had left me my coat, all of my magical trinkets inside of it were no longer there. They had even taken my mouth spray, and I didn't like the taste of my own breath very much. There were almost a dozen others in the cell with me, all lying motionlessly on the floor. Neither Spectra nor Matzo were among them, and a quick glance in the Astral showed me that they were all dead, their bodies preserved through magic instead of cold. It was a cheaper, albeit less effective, alternative, and suggested that the Zobop ran a productive operation here. None of these could be stored for more than 48 hours without rot, and if there were also still living people in other cells, they were doing a whole lot of chopping in a short time frame. I could hear a bone saw turn on somewhere down the hallway, followed by two men laughing and talking in Spanish. I curled up in the darkest corner of the room and attempted to put up a ward around me. To my surprise, the spell worked without a hitch, even though it would have been too close to a hermetic conjuration for Selmin to be comfortable with it. The king's power truly was vast. If anyone walked into the cell to get a new body while I was out scouting the place on the Astral, which considering the frequency at which they had to pull these was not unlikely, they would not even notice that I was there. I took a deep breath to find my center, and in a snap had detached my soul from my body. Years of doing this every night to go to sleep had made me a master of astral projection. At first I was surprised to find the astral plane around the chop shop squeaky clean, but then realized that it made sense. Especially when dealing with necromancy, a stray bit of magic in a house full of corpses was probably not a good idea. Plus, these empty bodies were ripe for habitation, so having spirits stalk around the place could also be risky. There was the faintest memory of horror in the main corridor, the residuals looking as though they had been scrubbed with a power cleaner, not decayed naturally. Horror was an emotion that took especially long to decay, and this place probably saw a lot of it. The trail led me to a space that appeared to be an antechamber to the chop shop proper, where I could recognize finer shades of mortal dread. Presumably this was where the living captives came to be executed before being passed on to the surgeons. In the next room, strong emotions suddenly ceased, and 6 auras separated into teams of 2 moved around their separate spaces. I could see concentration in them, and the occasional bit of amusement when one made a joke that the other found funny. These had to be the choppers. An adjacent room reverberated with electrical power and the subtle force of cold. They did use refrigeration after all, but only for merchandise that would be put on sale. It was certainly a good way to cut corners. I moved back up the hallway past my cell and into the deeper holding tract. There were 3 other rooms branching off a corridor perpendicular to my own, and 2 of them were devoid of auras, leading me to believe that they were either not cells or full of corpses. The one farthest down the hall, however, had an aura sitting in front of it, bearing the characteristic holes of someone with extensive cranial implants. And the cell behind him, there were 7 more auras, all of them in great distress, and all of them clearly augmented. I recognized Matzo and Spectra among them immediately. After snapping back into my body, I took care to maintain the attention ward as I moved to the door. With as much finesse as I was capable of, I projected a narrow beam of heat from my index finger, using it to melt the deadbolt. Once again, this display of elemental force would have been something Selman could not have helped me with. But for the king, it was not a problem. Just to make this clear, I was not drawing on my mentor spirit's power, at least not directly. He did assist me, but only as a focus and augmenter of my own power, which was considerable. When all of this was over, maybe I could even part ways with the king and get back to being a hermetic again. But then, being a shaman had taught me a great many things, and I'd had the kind of natural knack for summoning spirits that I'd never had for assembling elementals. The cell door opened without so much as a sound, which surprised me more than any squeak would have. This place clearly did not give a dreck about hygiene standards, but apparently keeping the hinges oiled was something they did religiously. Some people just have skewed priorities. The ward extended in front of me. I walked toward the room that Spectra and Matzo were being kept in. A kid with a chromed-up head was sitting in front of it, bobbing her head to the rhythm of some song she was listening to, reading a comic book. She did not notice my approach, and if she did, her first thought would be that I was one of the choppers coming, not a man risen from the dead. The first cell door I passed was apparently for people who had died of unnatural causes. As opposed to just being a heavy grate, this one was made of solid steel with a little window to look inside. Despite the liberal use of citrus air fresheners, the smell almost made me vomit. There was no door to the second room, only an empty frame. This clearly wasn't a prison cell, but something much better. It was the place where they kept the valuables of anyone they cut open. Jackpot, as a Yank would say. Hastily, but still concentrating on maintaining the ward, I searched the shelves for my stuff and put it in my coat pockets. I used the mouth spray, then looked for Matzo's assault rifle and pistol. Slinging the larger weapon over my shoulder, I was convinced that I couldn't shoot it, even if I tried. I then proceeded to pack in several vials of nitro, which I use for alchemical concoctions. In my experience, a lot of people who are not awakened and go deep into the world of technology are not as afraid of magic as they should be. Some are more afraid of it than they should be too, but everyone was afraid of bullets, and I did not want to take any chances. That is the reason why, when the girl sitting in front of the holding cell finally noticed me, she looked into the barrel of Matzo's pistol, and not a spell sizzling around my fingers. "How are the people in there secured?" I demanded. "Turned off the augs, restrained all limbs that weren't augs," the girl responded without emotion. The realization that she was being threatened with a gun clearly had not hit her in full yet, and the reptilian brain autopilot was handling the situation for her until the emotions kicked in. "Turn them back on. Open the door," I commanded. I'll need to jack in, she said, looking at the data jack cord sticking out of the wall behind her. If I even suspect you sounded an alarm, I will blow your fucking head off. Do you understand me? I wiggled the gun slightly. Fear and the realization that she was now very much in danger appeared in the girl's eyes. She nodded, then inserted the data jack into a port in her spine. Moments later, I heard the familiar cadence of an angry Matzo swearing.
Can kill all of you cocksuckers!
There was a pause. I could talk again. They turned my chrome back on. Hey, Spectra, they turned my fucking chrome back on. There was a rumbling sound as Matzo pulled the shackles I assumed he was bound by out of the wall. Matzo! Help everyone in there get out. We can use them as a distraction for our own escape, I yelled. At least one of the choppers down the hallway must have heard the commotion, so even if the girl didn't sound the alarm, chances were someone would.
Grimcal?
Matzo asked.
Is that you? Fucking cocksuckers said you were dead.
I'm pretty sure I was. I'll explain later. Right now we need to get the dreck out of here. Agreed, Spectra said, her voice weak. Help me out here, will you? Moments later, Matzo was mowing down the Zobop's front entrance guard with his assault rifle. The chop shop was a collection of squat, naked buildings by the side of a small lake with pitch black water. I could see the light smoke of Havana to the north, and the auras of a wide assortment of body-snatching creatures and spirits hiding in the forest. It turned out that my plan of using the other Zobop prisoners as meat shields had been a good idea, as at least 2 of them were shot down in their attempts to flee, allowing us to take down the distracted guards. Spectra sprinted toward an armored pickup truck covered in hoodoo sigils, using her spring legs to move at inhuman speeds. The Zobop orc standing next to it didn't even have time to aim his shotgun before she severed his head. A handful of the fleeing prisoners had gotten the same idea, and I did them the mercy of pushing their bodies out of Spectra's way with magic as she drove to meet us. I try to be good when I can, but I'm not a charity, and the 3 of us had a job to do. Things had quieted down when we got back into the truck, me on the passenger side and Matzo on the load bed. All of the Zobop guards seemed to be dead, and there had not been too many of them in the first place. The ghouls and body snatchers waiting in the forest were getting into motion, and I was glad not to be one of the choppers or the Decker girl still caught in the facility. The prisoners I did not have much fear for. Why would a monster hunt down someone who runs and is augmented when there is freshly killed meat and a motherload of carrion available? Spectra drove for 20 minutes before pulling into a quiet spot and giving me the "we need to talk" look. Matzo put it a little more directly when he jumped off the truck, making the hydraulics cry out in gratitude, and said, "Listen, Grimcal, I'm glad you saved us, but you were dead for 3 hours. What happened back there?"
So the cocksucker Calabarsee's being controlled by this Gilded Moon thing, Matzo asked.
And your new totem guy wants us to destroy it. I nodded. That's the gist of it, yeah? Matzo grunted and proceeded to vehemently shake his head.
Not gonna fucking happen, I'm telling you that right now. I'm all for killing Calabarsee. That's what we're here for. That's a thing of honor. But we're getting paid for bringing back the thing, and I made a promise to another family scalpel that I would do it.
You did listen to the part where a whole medley of primordial super spirits were so terrified of the Gilded Moon that they formed an alliance to destroy it, right? Spectra asked. I mean, that has to count for something. This artifact is dangerous, potentially apocalyptic.
Maybe they just want the fucking thing for themselves. You ever think of that?
Matzo retorted. The king does want us to destroy it, I noted.
Well, maybe that's how it fucking works, ain't it? You do something for your totem, next thing you know, it's got the power to destroy the world. Spirits can never be trusted. They always lie to you, and you never know how it really works.
Matzo had begun pacing. I know how it works, Matzo. I am an expert on this kind of thing, I tried to reassure him.
But he's your king. How do I know I can trust you?
He gesticulated at me. Maybe you're not even you. You were fucking dead for 3 fucking hours. Who knows what wandered into your mortal coil? He's not my king, he's just called the king. If anything, I'm less his subject now than I was when the guy who was his literal servant was my mentor spirit. But how can I trust anything you say? Matzo demanded. We've been friends for years, Matzo, I screamed. I'm the one who was kept out of the loop on this one. I'm the one who should be suspicious. Besides, you owe me for Ithaca. Don't fucking bring up Ithaca to me, you fucking cocksucker! Matzo charged at me, fists in the air. I knew that a single punch from him could easily break my skull, if not separate it from my body. I loaded up a bolt of arcane energy in my hand, holding it extended in front of me, hoping its glow would dissuade Matzo, but he got ready to lunge. Stop! Spectra screamed. Her voice made my bone marrow shiver. What the fuck is wrong with you two? We just barely escaped death and we're about to finish our job. I lost a long-time friend today. How is the only thing you can think about killing each other? Matzo stopped dead in his tracks and lowered his arms. He exhaled a long, furious breath. You know what, Grimcal? You're right. I do owe you for Ithaca, and it's a debt of honor. But not this much honor. I'll go in there with you. I'll have you back like old times, and I will look away when you do your thing. But after that, you and I are done. You understand me, Grimcal? We're done. You're asking me to lie to my fucking family because of what some spirit said, and that's not gonna stand. I nodded, gritting my teeth, trying to hide the pain his words were causing me. Part of me had expected something like this from the moment the king instructed me to destroy the Gilded Moon. It was like a machete had cleaved the innards of my chest apart, and I needed to hold them together by sheer force of will. Matzo was crazy, sure, and I didn't see him very often, but I did consider him a good friend. To prevent myself from dwelling on it, I decided to set things in motion. All right, Matzo, if that's how it's gonna be, that's how it's gonna be. And now let's get going. We have an hacienda to raid. Usually, Shadowrunners go quietly into highly secured places, then try to make an exit as quietly as they moved in. If the exit is a bit louder than expected, that is fine so long as the job gets done, and everyone makes it out alive. A situation where Shadowrunners move toward a highly secured place that is also an active battleground is rare, but it was exactly the situation we found ourselves in tonight. The heavy staccato of the Cuban Revolutionary Army's AK-97s alternated with the brrting firebursts of the ATS Technology Commando Unit's weapons. Where the Aztlanas were clearly superior in technology, the Cubans had strength in numbers, area knowledge, and the advantage of being in a defensive position. Nevertheless, the assault could not have started more than half an hour ago, because otherwise the only thing left would be the crackling of flames breaking through graveyard silence. Hacienda El Invierno was a walled villa located on a hill between open fields, promising all the luxury of the world if one could get inside, and also protection. The watchtowers in all 4 cardinal directions were decorated with colorful reliefs in otherwise brown plaster, but even they served as conduits for magical wards that Gregory Camacho had put up. They were so powerful that even Calabarsee must have had trouble creating the hole he had blasted through the northern wall into the rock garden, where about a dozen corpses lay strewn over the shards of stone, vases, and pieces of statuettes that may or may not have joined in the fighting at some point. Under the cover of nobody being left alive to see us, Spectra, Matzo, and I broke through the very same breach. The sound of AK-97s was dwindling fast, and though reinforcements were presumably on their way, it was Calabarsee I was worried about. I could feel the Astral quaking as spells and spirits of great power clashed inside the building, and was doubtful that even a man as powerful as Camacho could hold out long against the nigh omnipotence of Vincenzo Calabarsee and the Gilded Moon, voodoo wards or no. There was a burst of fire from behind me as Matzo shot down a lone Astlana that had presumably been left behind on guard duty. His combat armor was embellished with beautiful but not impractical feather patterns, and his helmet was shaped to resemble a bird of prey. "Fucking eagles," Matzo grunted. "Elite paratroopers. They really want this place bad." "Have you fought them before?" I asked. "Course, several times." "Me too," Spectra added. "The good news about this is that we don't have to watch out for jaguars. Their camouflage systems are scary, but they don't work with eagles." Truth be told, I had not even seen the eagle, but that was what Matzo was for. Even if he could not provide aerial surveillance this time around, as his drone uplink had been permanently damaged by being deactivated, his eyes worked perfectly. As I was about to step through the open patio door, he saved my life again by pulling me back. "Laser trigger," he said, pointing at the threshold. I could see nothing. "They probably expect that the Cubans will be sending more troops in," Spectra said. "As it happens, there is a whole convoy of them about 5 minutes away according to radio chatter. But if I know that, the Azzies know it too." Matzo smashed the window next to the door and jumped through it. No explosives went off. "Let's move," he said. The hallways of Hacienda El Invierno would be in need of renovations. Bullet holes in the plaster revealed the rock and wood structure underneath, which had suffered damage of its own. Watercolors of nature scenes and painted plates hanging from the walls had been ripped and shattered. Most lamps were broken. I stepped over the bodies of many more Cuban soldiers than Astlana commandos, but it did seem like the Eagles had taken losses, albeit mostly of the magical kind. Their corpses glowed with a residue of mystical energy. We entered a small living room just when a 6-man squad of soldiers did so on the opposite side. Before we even had a chance to explain that we were here to save Camacho, not kill him, the Cubans opened fire. It would have been a long shot anyway. I dove behind a heavy-looking couch and reached out on the Astral, grabbing hold of the first spirit I could find. On the side table, a planter pot exploded, and its contents turned into a brown wolf with green stems and flowers in its fur. I heard the whir of Matzo's rifle, but the orc was thrown back into a bookshelf when he was hit by a bolt of force. Apparently they had a combat mage with them. I looked around, but could not find Spectra. I rolled out from behind the couch, kneeling in the half cover of a hardwood coffee table, and sent a lance of blue flame against the Cubans. They jerked back, distracted from the momentarily exposed Matzo, and I rolled again, behind the couch opposite the one I had originally taken cover behind. I had a clear shot on them now, as they were scrambling to reposition, so I sent another lance, hitting one of them in the chest and setting his soul ablaze. My nature spirit followed, jumping at the battle mage with its fangs wide open. Matzo's rifle whirred again, and I saw that he had recovered quickly. 2 of the Cubans were taken down before they could retreat back to the doorway they had come through, and the battle mage was on the floor, wrestling with the wolf. The remaining 2 soldiers, however, had managed to retreat, and were now in a good position to spray us with fire and block our advance. Pain burned through the leash I had on the nature spirit as the battle mage was setting it ablaze. His hands had turned into burning embers, and the wolf was howling as it caught fire. Using his distraction, I sent a 3rd lance of blue flame against him, and the battle mage screamed out in agony. To relieve myself of the echoing pain, I dismissed the nature spirit. It was not going to be much use now anyway. The floor tiles next to me exploded as one of the soldiers opened fire. Some of the splinters almost hit my eye. "I can't get him!" Matzo shouted, and the cloud of paper snippets behind him told me that he too was pinned down. Drek. A moment later, screams of horror came from the doorway the Cubans were standing in, followed by fountains of blood and the gargling of someone choking on the contents of their own carotid artery. Spectra stepped into the room, cleaning the ceramic blade sticking out of her arm. "Shall we move, gentlemen?" she asked. I had located the epicenter of the astral quakes to be on the 1st floor, so that's where we would have to go. "Did you find a way upstairs?" I asked. "No, but there is a hidden stairwell behind the ballroom," she said. She had gotten access to the building's blueprints somehow. "Also, most of the cameras up there are dead, so I can't see where exactly they are fighting, but it looks messed up. And the camera feeds, too. I still don't know how she multitasks like that." When we entered the ballroom a few moments later, I could feel the fighting going on right above us. There was a network of cracks in the beautifully painted ceiling, and a group of ATS technology eagles was spread out all over the southern side of the room, blasted into pieces by a grenade that had left a crater in the parquet, the concrete below it, and the steel plate below that. This place really was a fortress in disguise. "Over there," said Spectra, pointing at a ripped banner of the Cuban flag in between two large windows looking out onto a garden with a swimming pool. "There's a pressure plate in the paneling that will open a door into a decorative turret." But before we could move upstairs to the fight came down to us. With a bone-shaking rumble, the ceiling above us crumbled and broke away. Small pieces of it fell at first, but then the whole structure came down. I barely had time to throw up a protective shield around Spectra, Matzo, and myself. It shattered when a major sheet of concrete broke its fall on it, but the alternative would have seen us crushed under it. Vincenzo Calabarsee landed on the ballroom stage, redirecting the energy of his fall into it, causing it to collapse in on itself. On the opposite side of the room, Gregory Camacho came gliding down from above. The middle-aged Ungan was wearing nothing but a silk bathrobe, the color of which matched his glowing violet eyes. It was singed in many places, revealing that every square centimeter of his light brown skin was covered in tattoos, all of them aglow with power. Though his entrance had a mystical air of power, he looked exhausted, spent. Whatever resistance he'd been putting up to Calabarsee and the Gilded Moon glowing on his chest, he would not be able to mount it much longer. "What the fuck?" Calabarsee exclaimed.
Didn't expect us, huh, cocksucker?
Matzo opened fire immediately, but Calabarsee held up his hand and formed another shield. The bullets made his arm shake, and on the Astral I could see that his power was being drained by several voodoo wards that would have stopped the average mage dead in their tracks. Camacho seemed to be a lot quicker of grasp than the soldiers the Cuban government had set aside to protect him, as he hurled a curse at Calabarsee the moment he was distracted. The spell threw up a protective umbrella before myself and Spectra, but was not fast enough to reach Matzo in time. With a snap, Calabarsee returned the kinetic energy of the bullets right to their sender, and Matzo was hit by a wave of force that sent him flying right through a wall on the opposite end of the room. "Drek!" I heard myself shout, and summoned a set of hermetic shackles in my hand. "Who the hell are you, and what do you want from me?" I heard Camacho's voice in my head. Clearly, he was a master of telepathy. Calabarsee blasted us with a ball of hellfire, which broke and was dissipated on Camacho's shield, singeing the flag banners and leaving a wall of flame on the ground. "We're here to destroy the thing that he draws his power from, and protect you in the process," I responded, hoping that Calabarsee could not intercept our communications. I hurled the shackles, and Spectra followed up with several shots from her revolver. Calabarsee was able to block the bullets, but the shackles closed around his wrists and ankles, glowing with force. I should not have been surprised, but Calabarsee continued to move as though they were not there, stretching them like rubber bands as he walked off the stage, his aura charging with ki. I could only hope they would at least slow him down. "Careful, I think he'll go straight for you now," I informed Camacho. "Can your shield hold his charge?" "No," the Ungan responded. "Not if he charges. Magic it blocks just fine, but kinetic energy is something I had to sacrifice to make it more flexible." I did notice that, instead of a static field of power, Camacho's shield was paper thin. Truly a masterful construction, easy to put up and change around at will. I wished I had thought of it. In a flash of light, Calabarsee zipped past Spectra and myself, going straight for Camacho. He ripped through the shield, but where others would have shattered, this one just had a hole in it, and was already beginning to regenerate. He delivered a key punch right to Camacho's chest, but the Jungan had seen this attack coming, and though he was flung halfway across the room, much of the force was redirected onto Calabarsee himself. He was already recovering mid-flight, but Spectra had other plans for him. As he flew past her, she delivered an electric shock to his body, timed perfectly to break his concentration. Calabarsee slithered across the floor and crashed into the ruined stage, cursing in Italian. It was time to put my improvised plan into action. Outside, the water in the pool rippled as I pulled a water spirit out of it. There were gaps in its form, as though something had taken bites out of the solid mass of flesh, and I realized that the chlorine it lived with probably was not too healthy. It smashed through the window with a reluctant grumble, and I could hear Calabarsee laugh over it. "You really want to try this again?" "Camacho, can you turn your shield into a tube?" I asked, hoping that the Jungan was still conscious. He was. Slowly, the paper shield moved. It was more of a funnel shape in the end, with Calabarsee on the open side, and the small opening he had ripped into it becoming ever smaller. Just like in Flotalandia, he made a chopping motion, and my connection to the water spirit broke, just as I had hoped. "Come on, this isn't even a challenge," Calabarsee said as he heaved himself back up. "You gotta do better if you want to take me down. Show me what you got." Happy to oblige. I reached into my coat and pulled out one of the vials of nitro I had stolen from the Zobop chop shop. On the way here, I had mixed it with guffer dust, dragonfish poison, and some holy water. It was a highly volatile mixture, one that I had only theorized in the past, and there was a good chance that it would blow up the entire building if I fumbled on this. It also still had a missing ingredient, a lens, if you will, that would unleash its full potential. My hand felt hot as I poured as much magical energy as I could bring up into the vial. Then I threw it through the hole Calabarsee had left in Camacho's shield and placed a static shield on the end of the funnel that was aimed at us, then gently flicked my fingers. The vial exploded, grabbing the water spirit and dissolving its essence into pure magical force. The tube that Calabarsee was at the end of filled with black smoke. Then, as the shield ripped apart, I was thrown back and my vision went white. I woke up moments later, lying next to Camacho. Spectra had been caught by a now shattered door, and it looked as though some of her artificial limbs were broken. I felt the residue of a secondary shield around me, and thanked the king for potentially having saved me from being pulverized by my own bomb. The windows had been blown out, and the entire half of the ballroom that Calabarsee had been in was warped and black as tar. There was a dark puddle of viscous fluid where the man himself had lain on the floor. It was over. Vincenzo Calabarsee was dead. "No, but seriously, who the dreck are you even?" I heard Camacho ask next to me. A lot of the tattoos I recognized as kinetic shields had turned into third-degree burns, and the Jungan's face was twisted in pain. Before I could say anything, a high-pitched klaxon echoed through the ballroom. The puddle that had been Calabarsee was making waves, and a small disc emerged from it, spinning in the air as it levitated toward the center of the room. A storm of golden light emerged from it, and though the gilded moon itself was as bright as the sun, I could feel the outline of something coalesce in the light surrounding it. It was like staring at the static of a screen. If you stare long enough, you can see shapes forming in the random noise, but the moment you try to actually glimpse them as a whole, they disappear. I tried to form a ball of flame in my hand so I could at least try to burn the thing, but it fizzled out as soon as I had sparked it. Pressure emanated from the gilded moon, both magical and physical, and it was squeezing the air out of my lungs, pinning me to the ground with the strength of 1,000 elephants. "It calls to me." Gregory Camacho sounded matter-of-fact. "With this power, I can become head Jungan." Moaning with discomfort, he slowly heaved himself up and took a few careful steps toward the gilded moon. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to warn him of the danger, but the force was so great I could not even move my jaw. The telepathic connection was severed, and even if I had tried, I could not have gotten through to the Ungan. Pain shot through my chest as my ribs cracked, and my vision was going black in the corners of my eyes as pressure built up in my head. I had to stop him, somehow. I needed to fight against this. With a zombie-like expression, Camacho trotted toward the Gilded Moon, reaching out for it. If he touched it, he would be lost, we would be dead, and the world would be destroyed. A hulking shape appeared in the doorway. I could almost hear the servos of Matzo's chrome, which was usually capable of lifting small cars, strain against the immense force exerted by the Gilded Moon. Camacho stumbled forward, attempting to get to the moon faster, but his wounds made him uncoordinated and weak. He almost fell over and only caught himself at the last moment. Shaking, Matzo's arm sluggishly raised his pistol. His head was red as a tomato, a mix of strain and boundless fury clear on his face. "Cocksucker!" he roared and pulled the trigger. There was an initial shockwave that broke a few more of my ribs, followed by silence. Then the Gilded Moon broke apart. It did not explode, did not go up in flames, and did not disappear in a flash of light. It simply sprung apart, like a glass that had fallen to the ground. I felt shards of it bore into my flesh, and could see bits of pieces stuck in the walls and ceiling. But they were simply shards of metal. Any power that would have been visible on the astral plane was absent. These objects were as mundane as soykaf. Camacho collapsed in the middle of the room, the violent glow gone from his eyes. Matzo had fallen backwards and was not making any attempts to get back to his feet. The thought of moving a single muscle was painful to me. As consciousness gave me the slip, I heard heavy boots and shouting. Ribs heal painfully. I had always known that. What I learned over the course of the next week was just how painfully they heal. Even though the best doctors in Cuba were taking care of me at La Benefica Hospital, I did not feel great at all. I walked into the lounge area that Matzo, Spectra, and I shared on the dime of Gregory Camacho and his government benefactors. I decided not to sit in one of the armchairs or couches and keep on standing, supporting myself on my IV drip. Sitting down was painful business. For the first time in days, Spectra's artificial facial muscles had stopped twitching uncontrollably and responded to her commands. She was laying on the couch, her expression neutral. It would take a while until they were properly rewired. "Guess what?" Matzo asked as he trudged into the room. His cyberware had been repaired to the best extent of this hospital, and some replacements would have to be made at a world-class cyberclinic. The internal burns he had suffered had healed quite well, the doctors said, and noted that most people would have died from them. He'd been the only one of us up and about, and had taken care of some business outside the hospital. We both looked at him, expecting him to finish the sentence. "Guess!" he demanded. "You won the lottery," I asked. "You bought a cookie from the vending machine," Spectra suggested. "No, Jesus and Mary, the Cubans said they're gonna give me the jar they put Calabarsee in, so I can give it to Dan Trevor. They also gave me some evidence photographs of the Gilded Moon being in pieces, and will take responsibility for the stray bullet that shattered it themselves." "It is a rare piece of art, after all," Spectra joked. "Camacho is really grateful that you shot that thing, huh?" Matzo nodded. "He says we're all invited for the party he's gonna throw when he becomes head Ungan. He'll fly us in from wherever we are in the world." "Sounds like a plan," said Spectra. "What about Acuario?" "They're making him a national hero. Apparently he was Cuban anyway, from some big island in the south." Matzo reclined in one of the armchairs. "Speaking of, it's gonna be the 4th of July soon. And none of us are gonna be working after this. I was thinking we could do some fireworks when we get back to the UCAS. Already told my wife to prepare a big barbecue. Invited all the family guys. You two were gonna be the guests of honor.
What happened to us being done after this job? I asked, unsure if the pain in my chest was the sting of having lost a friend or just my healing ribs.
Listen, what I said back there, I was fucking angry, alright? This whole honor thing, it runs deep with us Italians, he admitted. But you were right. If this Gilded Moon thing was some mind control shit, which it clearly was, who knows what it would have done to the capo of an allied family? Certainly nothing I'd want to be responsible for.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it, I admitted.
But hey, Grimcal, I think my debt for Ithaca's paid now, right?
I nodded. Yeah, I think you did more than enough to pay it off. Gilded Moon is, for all intents and purposes, fanfiction. The Shadowrun brand and setting are owned by Catalyst Game Labs. I created this story and the characters in it.
If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.